Good evening, everyone. My name is Mikkel Adgate. I am with the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, or DEP. Thank you all for joining us this evening for our long-term control plan meeting for the Citywide and Open Waters LTCP. We're very much glad to be here with you this evening and to have the opportunity to present our final recommendations for this particular LTCP. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. I want to recognize tonight that we have folks from DEP on stage and throughout the room. So we have folks from our bureaus of wastewater treatment, environmental planning and analysis, and the office of the agency chief engineer. So they may be chiming in at different times to help answer questions throughout the evening. And at the dais, and who you'll be hearing from this evening, we have Deputy Commissioner Angela Licata, Assistant Commissioner Pinar Balsi, Deputy Commissioner Pam Alardo, and our Director of Wastewater Integrated Planning and Modeling, Keith Mahoney. So we have a really wide range of expertise from DEP here this evening to help talk us through this particular long-term control plan. So in terms of how the evening will go, each of our speakers will be presenting slides, and at the end of their portion of the presentation, we'll be taking about 3 or 4 questions from the audience. So if you have particular questions about anything that you just heard, you'll have an opportunity to ask at that time. And then at the end of the meeting, we'll have an open Q&A for any questions that may not have been able to be answered. So if you do have a question, we'll ask that you just raise your hand and then use the microphone right at your seat to ask. And I'll be moderating that Q&A time, and I'm sure that we'll have a really productive dialogue this evening. So just to get started about why we're all here, I know that many of you are familiar with our LTCP program, but just to level set for those who may be new with us this evening, we're talking tonight about the issue of combined sewer overflows, or CSOs. Here in New York City, about 60% of our city is served by combined sewers. So that means that on a dry weather day, the image that you see on our left, all of the wastewater that's generated every time we flush the toilet, do the dishes, take a shower, goes into our sewer system and to one of our wastewater resource recovery facilities for treatment. But the system is combined, and so on rainy days, that stormwater runoff goes into the pipe with the wastewater and it mixes together. A lot of that flow is still sent to the wastewater resource recovery facility for treatment, but depending on the amount of rain, the location of the rain, we could be seeing combined sewer overflows, or CSOs. And so this is really the water quality challenge that we're talking about this evening. Many of you have been with us since we kicked off this particular LTCP program back in 2012. And so we'll be talking through a lot of the commitments and the opportunities that we found to reduce combined sewer overflows and improve water quality in our waterways. So I'm using this term LTCP, that stands for Long-Term Control Plan, which identifies the appropriate CSO controls to achieve applicable water quality standards. And we're developing this particular LTCP and all of the LTCPs that we have developed as a result of our CSO consent order, which was an agreement between DEP and DEC. And we do have representatives from DEC here with us this evening, so thank you both for joining us. So just as a reminder about where we are in this LTCP process, the consent order required that we develop 11 of these long-term plans. We have developed and submitted 10 of them so far, 9 of which have been approved by the state. The 10th, Jamaica Bay, is still currently under DEC review. And the final one, Citywide Open Waters, is the purpose of our meeting here tonight, and it is the one that is actually due to the state in March, so in just a couple of months. So the content of what we'll be talking about this evening will be primarily on the Citywide Open Waters LTCP. So to give you a sense of the scope of this, this particular LTCP, it is our largest, and you can see that it encompasses all of the city, really. So we're talking about the Harlem River, the Hudson River, East River and Long Island Sound, Upper and Lower New York Bay, and the Arthur Kill and Kill Van Cole. So it has been a massive undertaking for the agency, not only in terms of water quality samples that we've taken, the water quality modeling that we've been doing over the years, but also the analysis that's led us here to present these recommendations to you. And as I mentioned, this final plan will be submitted to the state in March. So I know that many of you have come to a lot of these meetings that we've had over the years, but just as a reminder, we kicked off the public engagement process for this LTCP back in early 2018, actually almost 2 years to the day. And we had 3 kickoff meetings, and then we had an additional sort of update meeting last spring that many of you were at. And then back this past fall, we presented what we called our retained alternatives, or what we were thinking in terms of projects. So for tonight's meeting, we'll be talking about our recommended plan. So we came in the fall, we presented our retained alternatives, we continued to refine those alternatives, we reviewed your comments, and tonight we'll be sharing what our final recommendation is. So with that, I'd like to invite Deputy Commissioner Licata up to the podium to talk about our investments and our spending priorities.
Thanks, Mikkel. Give it the clicker. Okay, so what I would like to do is spend just a few moments with you contextualizing this investment program for the New York City Environmental Protection. We are, as many of you know, both a drinking water agency and a clean water agency. And what that means is that we have the responsibilities for securing our public water supply, delivering that potable water, collecting the sanitary discharge from our households and businesses, and then also for treating that water prior to its discharge to the receiving water bodies all around New York City. And New York City is a very water-rich environment, right? So we have over 520 plus miles of coastline. And what happened is when our first developers here in New York City decided that they needed a sewage system because we had too much disease and concerns over sewage that was actually at that time just dumped right into the streets, they developed what many older cities did, which is a combined sewer system, as Mikkel described to you. So that's how we ended up in this place, that we need to now address this stormwater and sanitary waste that when it rains overflows the system. And we have to balance that with all of the other priorities and commitments at our agency. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as I go through these slides. What we're showing here is that the blue line is essentially the annual CSO volume in billion gallons a year. And you can see that since 1980 to where we are today in 2020, we have had a precipitous drop. And the majority of that occurred in those earlier decades on this slide, and I'll describe why that is in a moment. The other green line shows the cumulative costs for getting those gains, for decreasing that CSO volume. And you can see that costs are increasing as we move through the line. The other thing I would like to show, the dashed lines are estimated and the solid lines are actual. That's why I pointed out the 2020 year where we are today. And you can see that for the blue line, we're starting to approach the flat line or the flat slope of that curve. So for each dollar invested, it's becoming more and more difficult to have a reduction in CSO volume. So it's becoming more expensive. It's the law of diminishing returns. We wanted to show you the improvements that we've been making as a city. I mean, this is really a time to celebrate in many ways. We have made a tremendous investment, as I just showed you, and we're reaping the benefits of that. So from 1985 to 2018 here, you can see based on an account of fecal coliform bacteria. That's not exactly today's standard in some of these open waters, but just to keep things consistent, we wanted to show that for that standard, we are actually doing and achieving water quality goals in many of these water bodies. But where we struggle, how do we get slide view? I'm sorry. So maybe I'll just walk over here and point out. I don't want to overstate the gains that we've made. We are still struggling in these constricted water bodies. You might not be able to see that in the back, but there's a lot of water bodies, these tributaries that we've been focusing on with the long-term control plans that are still struggling to meet water quality standards. And that's as a result of CSOs, but also a lot of other issues associated with the configurations of those water bodies. Some of them are artificially deep because they were constructed for waterborne transportation. They have low dissolved oxygen levels as a result of that. They don't circulate well. A lot of them are longer and deeper and at right angles and have that configuration that is really not a very natural system. So we really struggle to meet water quality there. And with combined sewer overflow discharges and with stormwater discharges, that puts a lot of strain on these systems. I also wanted to show a little bit about how our population is increasing. We have over 1 million people from the point in which we start on this graph, 1992, to where we are in 2020. And so we're at about 8.25 million people in the city of New York. We have been able to decrease our water demand, which is a really fabulous thing. I mean, we as New York City dwellers have a very tight consumption program. We do a lot better than our neighbors to the east that have a lot of wasted water, in my opinion, for irrigation and other uses. So not only do we have a smaller greenhouse gas footprint in the city because we tend to move around efficiently, we also have a very, we have a small footprint in terms of our water use, which is really a great thing. Nevertheless, our water and sewer rates have been increasing, and they've been increasing somewhat dramatically. We have had a tripling of rates. However, adjusted to inflation, that's been about a doubling of rates over time over this period. So, and it's still, I would say, as a commodity, it's still a very inexpensive commodity. So we're showing you $1.38 per 100 gallons. That's how we usually estimate this. But it's a little over a penny a gallon that we're paying for water. So it adds up because people use, on average, about 80 to 100 gallons per person per day. So those costs do escalate as you pay your bills throughout the year. Let's see. Okay, so where do we spend our money on at DEP? I thought it would be interesting to show you that a great deal of our money, just moving across this pie chart, starting at the 4% drinking water dependability, that's where we're showing you the picture to the right at the top of the slide. That's a liner for the Delaware Aqueduct bypass tunnel. And the reason that we have built this bypass tunnel under the Hudson River, it's really quite amazing. We had to bore under the Hudson River to create a bypass for the Delaware Aqueduct because it is leaking. That bypass will allow us to reconnect the Delaware system and avoid the portion that is leaking. So we will have a continuous flow and supply. The Delaware River supplies sometimes more than half of New York City's demand. So this is a tremendous project for our resiliency and our reliability of the drinking water supply. So that's a really great investment. And we've just recently been able to slip this liner into that bypass that we created. And we should be making that connection in the next several years. So that's taking a big portion of our budget at this point in time. We also have the southeast, actually maybe I'll move to the right. So if you go to the next large wedge, you'll look at the green wedge, that's 34% on state of good repair. And really what that means is that I just talked to you about making a lot of investments in, let's say, CSO control and wastewater treatment. Now, when you build facilities, we all know that when we take on assets, we have to pay for their upkeep. So we have the depreciation factors working. We also need to continue to be mindful that some of our facilities that we have built are really aging out. We started with a lot of the wastewater treatment plants probably about 35 years ago, 40 years ago now. We have a system of pipes and sewers that I'll talk about in a moment that are aging. So then we look at the mandates, and that's that blue wedge of the pie, and that accounts for a lot of really tremendous and really great important projects that our regulators at the state and local level require of everybody in the nation. Those mostly our national standards that we're complying with. A lot of these have also improved the quality of our drinking water. They have required us to filter the Croton system. New York City has 3 different water supply systems, in fact. The east of the Hudson is the Croton system. Then we have just west of the Hudson, the Catskill system. And then the furthest west is the Delaware system that I spoke about earlier that makes up almost half of the New York City's water supply and can be actually more than that at times. And it's our highest quality water. So we have to comply with a lot of mandates, but a lot of really good projects came up as a result of this. Then we look at the sewer construction and water main construction. So if we add those two together, we're at 26% of the budget being spent on that in our 10-year plan. And that is a lot of the replacement that we have. So the pipes in many areas of the city are almost 100 years old. Sometimes the older pipes actually do better than some of the more recent pipes, but what we strive to do is to do diagnostics on which types of pipes are most prone to breakage and to target those for replacement and to frankly replace about 1% of the system a year, and sometimes we even struggle to do that. So if we're replacing 1% a year, right, we're taking 100 years to replace the whole system. So that is something that we need to really be mindful of. It's a really important aspect of our spending. And then we talk a little bit about the Southeast Queens. It actually shows up here in the next 10-year budget as 8% of the budget. Why is that? Southeast Queens is one of our last areas in the city, in addition to some parts of Staten Island that have yet to be sewered. So we're introducing storm sewers to this area of Queens that is really prone to flooding. It's very low-lying. And it's very complicated to drain. With all the filling that has gone on in Southeast Queens, they have buried a lot of streams and natural water courses that would normally handle this type of stormwater flow. But without those streams and with just the remnants that we have today, we see flooding corridors. So it's really important to us that we handle, and it's been very important to Mayor de Blasio, that we spend a great big portion of our budget to drain this last area that was developed very aggressively from 1920 to about the end of World War II, and moved faster than the city could keep pace with the drainage infrastructure. So again, 10-year capital program, $20 billion. So a lot of spending going on, a lot of good spending. And here we were trying to reflect with these pictures what we hear from our constituents overall as their priorities. So we are first and foremost protecting public health. These are not in any specific order, but these are hopefully reflective of your priorities as well as what we hear from our other stakeholders and other venues. We want to support economic growth. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Sustainability for DEP, so it is my job to really look very strenuously, very vigorously at the protection of the environment, at the support for economic growth, and at the social justice issues. And as a result of that, I sit across all of the operating bureaus and have a unique look into what is happening throughout the department. So the other thing is we need to be very conscious about affordability and sustainable rates for our customers. And we're trying very hard to establish more customer assistance programs for 1/3 of the population in New York City that, believe it or not, makes under about $40,000 per year. So we have a lot of people at the lower quintiles of the economic profile, and we have a lot of people at the top. It's no mystery. We've all heard of the Tale of Two Cities. This does reflect a lot of the cities in the country. There's hardly anybody in the middle anymore. So we just need to be conscious because we do have a uniform rate structure. Everybody pays the same for the water that they use. And even though a lot of these customers at the lower quintiles are not direct recipients of a water bill because they don't own the homes, they're renters, they in fact have those pass-through costs from their landlords. And we have a lot of initiatives about climate action and energy recovery. Deputy Commissioner Lardo's here. She'll talk about that. She feels very strongly on resource recovery for the wastewater treatment plants, that there's a lot of latent energy potential there that could be harnessed. And we'd like to do some spending on that as well. We look very closely at the environmental justice issues. It's been a new bill introduced by the City Council. I'm sorry, it's a law at this point. And we are going to work very hard on that as well. We want to make sure that the capital programs are distributed equally and equitably throughout the city, as well as to make sure that we have the highest priorities in these areas that have potentially been disproportionately affected and impacted by environmental programs. We also have ecosystem restoration. This is one of the ones that I really love because we have done such a tremendous job in improving water quality, and we see the return of whales and seals and other kinds of fisheries and habitats. We want to be able to complement the water quality improvements and really restore some of the areas that have been filled historically under bulkheaded and are just not what Mother Nature intended. So we also have, as I said earlier, the drinking water and the water quality treatment that we do, and the addressing the aging infrastructure. So just very quickly, I'm just going to give you a synopsis slide here. This just highlights the spending that we're doing on the long-term control plan program that you hear more about. We have a commitment of $4.2 billion that we made in the first go-round as we started to look through the early lower hanging fruit. Frankly, those had a greater economy of scale, so we were able to see bigger benefits from our spending. So we were able to spend $4.3 billion or so, and we were able to reduce CSOs by 5.6 billion gallons a year. Now we have the long-term control plan process, and we are estimating over $5 billion of investments will be necessary, and that will yield 3.5 billion gallons a year of either reduction or treatment through disinfection. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll turn the podium over to whom? To Mikhail.
Actually, you get to stay up there, Angela, because we're going to just take a couple of questions from the audience. So first, thank you so much. So we do have time for a couple of questions for Angela, if there are any. Yes, sir.
Joe Hardigan from Rockaway, we've spoken before. It's a nice color brochure.
Oh, thanks.
But who checks your work? Who tests the water quality besides you? It's like me monitoring myself. I mean, there's no independent checking of the waterways. Check your work. Who does that? Water samples. I know, like the water quality off of off of Rockaway where I live, changes. The bay changes, and it always seems to pass. I want to know: is there any group or people that check your work?
You know, that's an interesting question. I mean, I will say on the drinking water side,
I mean, on the sewer water side. I'm talking about the
water quality.
Where everybody wants
So
to
we do have some citizen science that is going on. We do look at the citizen science that is collected. We do have other scientific organizations such as the Harbor Estuary Program that is funded by EPA that does some water quality analysis through the Harbor, what they call Hudson River Foundation. So there are private groups that are out there. But I would say that we stand behind our work. It's very scientifically collected, and we have reams and reams of documents that go into the laboratory analysis for this work. We also do a lot of modeling, and that's where some of that work can be more subjective because it's not actually measured, but we are projecting. So that might give you some pause. But that's how the work is basically done, and it's, again, assured by some of the independent contractors and others that are in the field.
So, Angela, I can add to that. We're heavily scrutinized and regulated by DEC, no surprise. Every sample that we take in the receiving water goes through a chain of custody. It is a system that is, again, overseen by DEC, and every single sample that goes to our lab or to a contract lab has to follow a very strict chain of custody. Every single one of our laboratories, and we have 6 of them, have accreditation from DEC, which is a very high level, or I should say in-depth investigation of how we're taking samples. They actually give us samples and do their own sampling. We try and match it up. The accredited staff sits in our laboratory for about a week, at least once a year. So I'm very comfortable with the data that we're getting in terms of accuracy. I don't think there's a question of us having poor or inaccurate data.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am, in the green.
Thank you. I recently read a Rolling Stone magazine article saying that fracking water is allowed in New York State, and that there are a lot of petroleum-related businesses that ship water from other states to Pennsylvania and to other states. Because I think there are only 5 that they mentioned where it's allowed. I'm curious about that and whether or not that's true to your knowledge and what you might be doing to check for radiation from fracking water.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, there is no fracking allowed in New York State at this time.
There's a petition going around to asking for New York, and mention New York, and Food and Water Watch is getting petitions for that to be stopped. So I think it is in New York.
Yeah, we will remain very diligent on that front.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Bear with me. I have a bit of a speech problem. The last time I attended anything similar like this is probably about 5 years ago, when DEP, state and local DEP, were doing presentations in each borough about one issue was trying to get the street drainage and house drainage not going into the sewer system, causing the overflows when we get rain. One of the points that was brought up at the time, and I did research later finding other records backing this up, was that the city for quite a long time has not. They found it cheaper to pay the penalties for not being current. Apparently there's a national bill on that. And we were actually one of the last to be quote old major cities, not completely done. So you were mentioning about the money that's going in from the budget. How does that compare to the fines that were being paid previously? Dollar. In other words, is this actually helping things out? Obviously in the long term, but how is that affecting things on a yearly budget? Also, at that earlier presentation, they were introducing the swales. I might not be saying this correctly. Around the sidewalks with different street sections, there was supposed to be some way of the water gravity feed, and then filtering, and then feeding that into some separate type of drainage. I saw quite a number going up in Queens around the time of this presentation, and I'm going to say this in all due respect. I'm not meaning this in a disrespectful way. The presentation was like, swales are the answer. All new construction, sidewalk streets will be having these swale systems, and I have not seen it actually happen?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take that question in two parts. I mean, the first one I think is a little bit regarding penalties. We don't pay a lot in penalties. There are times when we are late on consent order items where there may be a penalty imposed. That penalty money is generally steered towards some environmental benefit project. So, I mean, you should rest assured that there is not a tremendous amount, not to the extreme level of the spending that I was showing in the billions of dollars. So we don't have that issue. But the point you raised in terms of New York City being a late city to the game of maybe CSO control, if in fact that was your point,
Yes.
I think in part that is because New York City was actually one of the first out of the gate when we did our water body watershed facility plans. So when the CSO policy was first introduced in 1992 or thereabouts, the city started embarking on what could be done. I mentioned some low-hanging fruit. And that's when we actually built 4 CSO storage facilities. I won't name them all, but so we do have a lot of investment that has already been established, and that's why we had a tremendous savings right out of the gate. But now we are looking at going, the LTCP project has taken us back to the same water bodies and looking for some more storage and volume reduction and CSO treatment. And to your second point, you have done a tremendous job of giving us a great segue to our green
If you could
infrastructure
do me a
program.
favor before you go to the second part, the first part of what you're saying, the watersheds were mentioned in that presentation with the swales many, many years ago. And I happen to actually live in one of those areas from top of the hill on Tremont Avenue, go downhill toward the Bronx River, which I see listed over there. And having lived in Queens, I'm familiar with what you were saying about the building. But in some of the watershed areas that we targeted, obviously they weren't able to get everything, but those were priorities that were being made some years ago. I have not seen, and I am aware of the building that's going on, and I don't see the contractors in any borough doing anything adding on to the infrastructure for this. So if you could address that before you go to the second half, please.
Right, well, this presentation that's upcoming is going to show you where all of the active construction is taking place. You've made a very fair point.
It's called New York City.
Yes, that's where we're going to show you on the map. So if you just give us a few moments, I think most of those questions that you just asked will be addressed. I will just state that I agree with you that the Bronx has been slower. We've reached a lot of challenges in the Bronx with high bedrock and high groundwater table. So we have been a little bit slower to come to the Bronx and find the proper solutions there. But I'm going to turn it over now to Assistant Commissioner Pinar Bassi. And if she doesn't answer all of your questions, we'll come back to you. How's that?
I thought you were going to do the second half.
I'm going to cover
Thank you.
the green infrastructure portion of the program, but many of you know me. Actually, green infrastructure is my third adopted child, so I love it dearly, and I've been in the field every day with 20 different contractors building bioswales, but bear with me, I'm going to give you a lot of information today, and if any of you are willing to join me in one of these field visits, please sign up your name, and I'll definitely call you when we are out there. But so to start with, the green infrastructure program is part of our long-term control plans, is included in our baseline conditions, which when we call it a baseline, it may not be a familiar term for some of you, but that means that those projects are going to be built. It's a given project, and those are going to be built by 2030. So when we call about baseline, we say either it's a gray project or a green project, and there's a timetable associated with it, and a volume reduction is already taken into account before we go through these different additional alternatives in the long-term control plan. So just to set the stage, Green Infrastructure Program is indeed, although currently under construction, is already accounted the benefits under the long-term control plan. So talking about the GI, many of you have been coming to these meetings, and we started the program in the right-of-way. That was our low-hanging fruit. And you see there's like 6 bullets I listed there under the GI, which is currently a $1.6 billion project or program. They are not in order of importance, but I want to highlight the fact that the program evolved tremendously during the last 5 years. So as I said, we started in the right-of-way. We shared a lot of pictures of the rain gardens that we are building in these streets. And then we said, you know what? It's not, we need to go and expand this program because we can't build all of the program requirements on the streets. So we added this public property retrofit portfolio. Then we expanded to the private properties, which many of you helped us, which I'm going to go over. And we said, okay, let's go back and, redo our stormwater regs and incorporate some of the private sector in our portfolio. So that's what we are currently doing. And we said, green doesn't have to be green all the time. There's a lot of way of thinking about green. So we said water reuse is one of the tools that we really encompass as part of use less water, which I tell my kids every night. That means less CSO reduction or more CSO reduction because of this. So we found that relationship and we said, we need to expand this in our green portfolio. And the last but not the least, and Karen and many of you have walked through this path with us, which is our largest green infrastructure, which we added to our portfolio, is our Tibbetsburg project. So my presentation is going to go each of those in more details. So I'm going to start with your questions, sir. Where are we now in terms of building the green infrastructure? And I think I'm going to say it, and I know some of you may think that we are falling short, but currently we built 4,500 rain gardens already, and most of those are indeed in Queens and Brooklyn. Where we are expanding is currently in construction 7,600 additional bioswales. And if you come to Astoria, Long Island City, Bronx, which I just kicked off with Triumph, one of the Bronx contractors, he's building additional around 900 bioswales in Bronx alone. But most of our work, street by street, if you start from Astoria, Long Island City, and move your way up to the northern Queens, all the way to southeastern Queens, that's where we are. We are literally in each and every neighborhood, and most of my work is going there because I live in Forest Hills. So I'm seeing a lot of our contractors completing 20 to 30 rain gardens, working 6 times a week, from Monday to Saturday, and building these bioswales. So, any of you are doubtful, please join me. There's a lot of contractors that are out there. As I said, 20 contracts are already in place, either in construction, in active construction, or NTP'd in March. So those are the numbers that I'm sharing. And I am very proud of that because I have gone to many, many other cities, and when I give those numbers, people cannot believe that we can handle this many construction all at once. So currently we are around 11,000 assets in the ground or to be in the ground. And then the next generation of contracts, which we are going to be issuing, is going to add another 4,000 to the number. So at the end of the program, we are looking around 15,000 to 20,000 assets in New York City. And really we need a lot of people who can acknowledge what they are, right? Because we even ask the school children, is this a GI or a triplet? And sometimes we get those answers, oh, it's a green infrastructure, so we need to get to spread the word out. And I appreciate you raised this question. We are indeed reaching out a lot of neighborhoods. So coming back to the East River open waters, these are the contract areas that is in the open waters, which some of them are already constructed, others are indeed in construction. And at the end of the day, we are going to be accumulating around over 180 million gallon stormwater managed in the open waters area alone. This doesn't account for Bronx or other parts of Queens or Brooklyn. So last time I was here, I was asked, okay, what do they look like? And honestly, I used to say it looks like this. I used to have one picture in my hand going door by door. Now, we expanded our portfolio so much, I have to bring a portfolio with me, like a salesman. But it is indeed have gone from the part that you are most familiar with, which is our rain gardens, right? These are the traditional rain gardens, which is like 20 by 5 or 15 by 5 that we can easily plug in the sidewalks that, with a tree, with a vegetated, with an inlet and an outlet, easily understandable and noticeable by many of you. But most recent years, we heard from you. Karen has been coming to these meetings and asking, why can't you build them bigger? Can't you just get more infiltration, go above and beyond your 1-inch capture, and the climate is changing, start doing more in terms of a capture. So we really start identifying, okay, are those, there isn't that many expensive sidewalks that we can place them, but wherever we find, and I got the lottery, there are 4 of them in my backyard, back of my house. We call these super swales. They are 11 by 17, 2 connected to each other. So I'm there every day. I don't, my maintenance folks do not even maintain. I'm maintaining it with the neighborhood kids. So, but these are some of the infrastructure that we really heard from you, and where we start seeing these available areas, particularly in the sidewalk, we abandoned our standard 20 by 5 design and we start expanding them as much as we can. So the one on the right-hand side is a green street. This is another one. Green infrastructure. It's not a traditional look and feel, but it is indeed functioning more than 1 inch of a rain storm and capturing around 2.5 inch. I'm going to go back. So our newest addition to the portfolio is our infiltration basins, and this is where we are most of the people are not familiar, but we have to really pivot from our standard design, because once we start walking these streets, we came to realize if we keep this one standard design, which is our rain garden, we are going to reject a lot of sites. Because we compete with DOT, right? The bus stops, the signs, and then the park has a tree, and then National Grid has a main, and Coney has an electric line, so you're like, okay, where am I going to fit? And if we insist on this one standard rain garden design, we lose, because we cannot fit it everywhere. So we decided, okay, it's time to change and adapt to the street conditions. So we came up with this new infiltration designs, which are on the left. It comes with a concrete top. It is actually really helping us, especially those commercial neighborhoods where we cannot side a rain garden, or if we do side it, it's gonna accumulate a lot of trash. So we are now siding these concrete top infiltration basins. You can't tell it's a GI, right? There's no green in it. I was just joking with my team, maybe we should put a tree picture on the top. Because, you can't really say it's green, but it is indeed functioning as green, meaning that most of our green infrastructure is actually the engineering stone layer and the sand and all that components underneath the ground, where we are building those small reservoirs. So this is indeed providing a same level of storage underneath, but on the top it really fits to the neighborhood characteristics and the site conditions. On the right-hand side, it is a hybrid version of that, right? So here you go. The street is in Flushing. It's a newly built infiltration basin. But if you see, I don't know if it's clear on the picture, it is a very sloped street. The pitch is around 20%, right? So building our rain garden, it's not going to work. It's going to bypass that inlet and outlet. So we said, okay. And the neighborhood block is this very small patchy grass area, right? And then there's the sidewalk, but it's a very narrow sidewalk, so we will never be able to fit our standard rain garden. So we said, let's do this hybrid approach. So on the left, it's a grass top, so you can tell we even build a green infrastructure, but you see the inlet and the outlet. And then on the right, under that concrete, there's more storage. So this is how we keep changing our thinking and looking at the neighborhood characteristics. And I know who loves green infrastructure here? I want to see the hens. Wonderful. When I'm out there, I'm chased by some people, right? Like they are like, leave us alone. I just did my South Fork. I don't want you to come here. So in those instances that people are pushing because they have ADA, requirements or disabilities, so on and so forth, we don't want to impose. We really need to consider that because I'm going to leave one day or retire, hopefully, from the city, but these are going to stay. So we said, we need to accommodate the neighborhood characteristics and the people wishes so they don't hate what I put in front of their house because I have 4 of them in the backyard. So that's what we start changing, and I think I'm happy to say, in the past, I come to this group and Larry's here, and always tell us that you're not building enough, but our original estimates were around like 5,000 to 6,000. Now we increased around 7,600 because we incorporated these new designs in our portfolio. So the last, not the least, I'm not stopping, so I really want you to pay attention. See, we are having these different asset types. This is the newest one, a forced payment. We have been piloting this in Rigo Park on Alderton Street, which is very close to our office, so we can watch it very carefully. And these are the panels, they are like pre-made, precast panels that can infiltrate the rain underground. So we weren't really sure if it's going to work, so we've been piloting it almost 2 years now, and we've been getting very good results. And I think this is going to be the next thing we want to go back to Bronx. Because in Bronx, we couldn't build these rain gardens, right? The conditions did preclude us building these rain gardens, whether it's an infiltration basin or a rain garden, but this new tool could help us to expand some of the areas that we missed in the past. So currently it's in Rigo Park. I think it is going to be one of our largest tools if the Jamaica Bay long-term control plan is approved. We want to include this in the southeastern Queens, which is really going to help with the flooding issues in those Ozone Park, Queens Village, and St. Albans neighborhoods. And, most recently, since the group started working on these other projects, which we rely a lot on our contractors, but we said, we had to really start doing some of the job in-house. So we created an in-house design group, and I would like to give an applause to them if they are here. But we identified these large medians. Karen, goes back to your pitch, right? Like these large medians, either owned by the parks or DOT, and they are abandoned. You can see this is in Hillside Avenue in Queens and 88th Avenue. This is the large median area. It looks awful to me, right? So what we've been doing is we are working with if the land, this median parkway is owned by the parks, we work with the parks, but most instances it's DOT owned. So we've been working with them and really converting those to the concept, which is here. This is going to be one of our largest ones. It's around 1/4 mile in terms of the length, and it's going to provide 3.4 million gallon reduction. But these way we can really incorporate the street slope towards that and then capture all the rain flow. And not only really capturing, but also we are improving the recreational opportunities for the neighborhood. So we have 35 in the pipeline now that we are doing in-house design, and hopefully we'll be bidding them this upcoming year. So the next portfolio that we are kicking off, or actually we kicked off the design under 3 major contracts with the NYCHA, the Housing Authority, the Parks, and Department of Education. As you can tell, they are the largest owner of land in the city. So that's why we really chased these partnerships, because we wanted to retrofit their land. And the last portfolio we added is a smaller portfolio, but it is very important, especially with the NYPD. They have beautiful parking lots that we are going after and retrofitting those parking lots and also improving the capital program. So a couple pictures I included. This is a recent addition to our portfolio. Currently we have designed 70 park sites, and we are planning to bid this summer. We are actually having a industry day, right? February 25th. We are going to be inviting all contractors. If you know anyone, we'll send you the invite. But the idea is to brainstorm with our contractors who are interested in bidding these contracts to see how we can package it so it can be built more cost effectively and expeditiously.
I'm sorry, Bernard. DP, I apologize for interrupting, but it's an hour into the meeting, and we've not discussed a single issue relevant to this massive plan affecting our waterways.
Well,
is
is
there
that,
some way we can advance this? So
well, is that, okay, excuse me. So I understand that there's a lot of questions about the recommended plan. We will certainly get to that portion of the presentation. There will be time for Q&A. I'm going to ask that you let our speakers finish. We'll take a couple of green infrastructure questions, and then the very next section will be on the recommended plan. Please go ahead, Bernard.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and breeze through. So the TPL, partnership, many of you know, it's the Trust for Public Land, and we are converting some of these schoolyards and incorporating the GI into the schoolyards. And then, one addition is, as I explained before, we are expanding to private property now, moving from the public property. And there are 3 buckets under that program, which is our grant program, which has been on the books, but we amended the grant program and now really shifting the focus to the green roofs under that program. Private property retrofit program, which many of you helped to put this out. We bid the contract. We have 53 million where we would like to incentivize private property to build GI, green infrastructure, for those 50,000 and above. And the most recent news, I hope this is something probably you have heard, but we introduced a legislation on January 23rd, 2020 for the new Unified Stormwater Rule that is going to expand some of our requirements, stormwater requirements, from our separately sewered areas to the combined sewer areas, so we can bring more green infrastructure on private property. And at the end, we are looking at these construction, post-construction requirements. I'm not going to go into details. There's a lot of technical aspects to it, but we'll be rolling out a very extensive public outreach program in the upcoming months, so please stay tuned. I talked about the demand management. This is our water conservation portfolio, and we have 2 large projects under the Citywide Open Waters Long-Term Control Plan, which we are looking at around 16 million gallon reduction through the water conservation efforts. And Tibbetts Brook is definitely a lot of discussion has been done on this project. We are working with the Parks Department and CSX to look at this daylighting project, as it's going to require acquisition of the easement. And currently, this is the path, the flow path, and the goal is to take care of the baseline flow and bring the daylight into the old stream bed. So it's going to be an open channel flow up to 31 CFS, and we aim to reduce the CSOs around 228 million gallon per year reduction. So it is indeed included under the baseline, but it is a new project that is going to require additional funding. So talking about that, the second part of the Tibbetts Brook, one is daylighting. That's the biggest part, the 223 million gallon. But we are also having a phase 2 part of the Tibbetts, which we are increasing the storage in the Van Cortlandt Lake, which is going to provide additional 1-foot dynamic storage in the lake itself. And we are working with Karen and the team looking at the living shoreline proposal. So we haven't kicked any design, but definitely when we do, we will partner with the local entities to incorporate some of those thinking. So this is the modification which we are proposing in the Van Cortlandt Lake in order to increase and provide this dynamic storage. So I think that's all I have. Do I have time to take questions?
Yes, you have time for any
Okay.
green infrastructure questions?
Green infrastructure. Have you thought about using all the cemeteries in New York City?
That's a wonderful question. I visited several of them. They are pretty green when it comes to the cemeteries, but the one in Bronx, which we visited, they had a nice parking lot and a maintenance area, which we are reaching out to them to include under our private incentive program. Yeah.
Say, I'm using regular
They do.
stormwater for the sprinkler system. It's not like anybody's going to.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, I think, we are looking because where we get the most cost efficiency is the 50,000 and up, but the one in Bronx Cemetery, it has this very good parking lot, which we thought it will be good. And they actually would like to grow vegetables. So it could be some kind of a vegetable garden / green infrastructure.
Any other green infrastructure questions? Yes, sir, in the blue. No, the one behind you, and then Mike after.
This may be more of a suggestion or a confirmation. In terms of the partnerships, I know you're talking Reach Out, Department of Parks, and even yourselves have a large portfolio of community gardens. I happen to manage one of them at the DEP site, and we put in a rain garden. When it comes to Youth Leadership Council, Green Thumb, we get enormous amount of information, we get lots of students, but we've not heard, or no one's reached out. Maybe you might want to reach out to the existing community gardens. They could put in rain gardens that would also be rooftop collection and kind of utilize some of the assets. Now, perhaps you're already doing that, but in which case I'm pleased. Otherwise, it's a suggestion you may want to consider.
All right, thank you. Yeah, do we have any? We do. We have two under the grant program. It's small, but it's a good start.
Thank you. Mike?
Hi, we have a number of elected leaders in the room, and I would like an opportunity to hear from them. When is that going to happen? And about green infrastructure, of
Sure.
course.
At any point that they would like to speak, you are more than welcome to. The floor is yours. The floor is yours if you'd like to.
After this, you're going to do a final presentation that speaks to what's in the plan.
Yeah.
So maybe right after that would be a great opportunity for us to give some comments on the plan.
Sure.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Any other green infrastructure questions? Paul, please.
Just beautiful, I have to say. Just incrementally, I think you'll get to water quality in the whole harbor on the steps you're on. The thing you're disincluding, but I think it would do very well. You even showed a picture of a kind of lawn-like structure with a shrub next to it. You can see the shade of the tree. The reason some of us started down this path was because of macropore formation. It's a papers by Bevan and Germain from the early 80s. And I believe you're probably getting macropores that are actually facilitating the flow of water from those green infrastructure buildings that are some distance. I'm trying to get USDA now and USGS to basically look. There's some ground penetrating radar that can identify fine roots and root structure, and you may be able to use that to identify basically macropore development, even under areas where there is bedrock, like in the Bronx. So anyway, beautiful work, but I think you can actually document some of those pieces to take us down the road, because you're on the road to make a huge difference in not too long. The number is, once you get something like 80 to 160,000 of these systems, you basically have the combined sewer done. So it takes a while, but you're on the road.
Thank you, Paul. So with that, we're going to close out the green infrastructure questions. Thank you so much, Coney, for that. To talk about the overview of our representation. I'm sorry? Sam's mic is off. Oh, how about that? Is that better?
Good evening, everyone. Keith Mahoney with the Office of the Agency Chief
Sound is
Engineer.
off. Hit the speak button. There you go.
Excellent. Sorry about that. I'm Keith Mahoney with the Office of the Agency Chief Engineer with the New York City DEP. The first slide I have here is very simplistic here, but a lot really went into this. So when we started looking at water quality compliance, that's really the backbone of this whole CSO program. So when we undertook the open water CSO program, we had a comprehensive 2-year sampling program that was used to help calibrate and validate our water quality models. The other thing we did with the water quality models, the old open waters water quality model had 40,000 grid cells. We increased that resolution up to 260,000 grid cells to help us better capture water quality attainment, nearshoring, and then some of the embayments. So the next thing, when you see these check marks, this water quality of those 260,000 grid cells, we looked at attainment in all those. If any of those cells showed less than 95% water quality attainment, you'll get a red X. So in the majority of the waters, it's greater than 95% projected water quality attainment for a 10-year period, including 2011, which was very wet. And the vast majority was a full 100% attainment throughout the open waters. The few exceptions when we look at fecal coliform, in which we're looking at a primary contact criteria of 200 geomean, you'll see a few red X's towards the bottom in the Kilvan Cove, which is the CSO tributary, as well as in the Arthur Kill, which isn't. The issues in this one, and again, the attainment, this doesn't mean the whole water bodies are non-attainment. There's certain cells that aren't fully attaining at 95%. And in this, part of it's the circulation. It's not as much circulation as a lot of the open waters, the East River, the Hudson River. And the other thing is other sources other than CSO. This is a shared water body with New Jersey, so there's other wet weather discharges. So you can see 100% CSO reduction. We don't project full attainment with primary contact, but we do have pretty good overall attainment, and most months are in full attainment. There's just a few exceptions. We also look at another bacterial standard which has recently been passed by DEC, which is the Enterococcus standard, which applies only to coastal recreational water bodies. So for us, that applies to the Upper East River up near the Long Island Sound, as well as New York Bay, the whole thing down from the tip of Manhattan down into the bay. So there again, the overall water quality looks pretty good. When we look at the Entero 30-day for a 10-year run, every cell in there is greater than 95% attainment. When we start looking at the STV, a statistical threshold value, that's usually a more stringent standard, you do see the red X, and again, most of the water is attained. It's more the nearshore areas and Gravesend Bay where we have some issues, again, circulation, and it's a strict standard. But again, overall, the water quality looks very good throughout the open waters. And the last one we look at is dissolved oxygen. Again, applying the same criteria with greater than 95% for each cell. And, so again, you see most of the water bodies were fully attained in the DO, with the exception there's a few minor hits in a portion of the Arthur Kill, in the Class I portion. Again, non-CSO trib and less flow, so you get some stratification in those water bodies. Some of the key takeaways, this is from the last presentation. Again, for the CSO program, there's been $9 billion investments. That includes over $4 billion in baseline investments in terms of green infrastructure, as well as a lot of great projects that were pre-LTCP. And as part of the 10 submitted LTCPs, we have greater than $5 billion in additional commitments over the next 20 years. The next one, over to the right of that, just kind of is another takeaway in terms of CSO volume. So of these combined watersheds, we typically get almost 85% wet weather capture. So we are treating most of the wet weather flow at the treatment plants, but again, during the heavy storms and all, there are some CSO discharges. The bottom left just again shows the baseline. Again, overall the water quality looks really good in the open waters. And the last one is something Angela got to, is the cost effectiveness, the kind of economy of scale. As we start chasing these CSO, these more extreme events, there's a significant cost with little water quality benefit. So I mean, there's always a benefit, but it's balancing all these other needs in terms of state of good repairs. We have to balance both the water supply, wastewater treatment. We're balancing things like resiliency. We're balancing sustainability, greenhouse gas reduction. So it's all lumped in together. So that's another key takeaway. So in terms of the open waters analysis, very similar to all the other tributaries where we had a toolbox. We looked at low-cost solutions all the way up to 100% storage for a typical storm. So it wouldn't capture every storm, but it would be a large storage tank or tunnel. What the difference between the open waters from some of the other tributaries, again, is that water quality attainment. A lot of the tributaries, there was non-attainment in these tributaries. There was very little flow in a lot of these dead-end tribs and all. Whereas the open waters, you just have a lot more circulation. Some of the other differences, just the geographical area. I mean, tributary is much easier to deal with than dealing with the entire city, some 300 plus CSO outfalls. So it became challenging. So as we started really narrowing down the alternatives, the two things we really focused on was optimization, trying to see how much we can maximize within the existing sewer system, And the other thing, when we had to look at storage, tanks weren't viable for 300 plus outfall, so we started looking at CSO tunnels. So those were really, at the end of the day, kind of the retained alternatives. So in terms of system optimization, as I said, over 300 plus outfalls, so we really focused on, first we have these 100 kilometer outfalls. So back in 2000s, we took some of the larger outfalls, there's level sensors installed, and these were originally installed to monitor for dry weather overflow. So these were put in there just to make sure these larger outfalls, we weren't discharging anything during dry weather. We now use those to help us kind of understand the CSO program. There's no way of these any sort of real-time control, a lot of post-processing and all, but we are looking at these. So as part of this evaluation, we took these 100 CSOs, which happen to also be the biggest CSO in CSO outfalls, and we added 20 more in terms of proximity to beaches or boat launches and things like that. And those were the focus for our optimization. And as part of the optimization, we looked at things, which I'll get. Part of the optimization, we looked at things like low cost more. So we have a regulator. This is up at that top right of the screen is a regulated device. So what happens, the dry weather flow comes in. I don't know if I have a pointer here. Will it work? Okay. So the dry weather comes into that regulated chamber. It's particularly weird, so all the dry weather flow, and we're trying to talk loud here, so all the dry weather flow goes into that diversion chamber, goes to an interceptor, it all goes to the wastewater treatment plant for full treatment. During wet weather, as the elevation surcharges and the sewers start, the hydraulic rail on the sewers start building up, they'll tip over a weir and go out that tide gate into the outflow, and that's a combined sewer overflow. And that's to protect the upstream areas from flooding. And typically now we try to design these for a 5-year storm, historically maybe a 2 or 3 year storm. But that's how it operates. So when we looked at it as part of this analysis, we said, what can we do in that regulated to cost effectively optimize the system? So we looked at things like raising the weir. And typically if we raise the weir, we'd also have to lengthen the weir, so we'd have to expand that chamber. We looked at things like, there's typically an orifice, like a sluice gate prior to the branch interceptor. So that sluice gate, we look at enlarging to try to send more of the wet weather flow into the interceptor. We look at enlarging the branch interceptor, which is right here, again trying to get more flow into the interceptor. And we also looked at things like expanding some of our pump stations. We have 90 plus pump stations throughout the city. So those are things we considered as part of the optimization. One of the challenges with the optimization is we also had to look at things like hydraulic grade line. So if there was anything that impacted the hydraulic grade line, particularly in shallow sewers, we wouldn't retain that alternative due to the risk of flooding the upstream areas and all. The other challenge we had with this, we ended up using a software known as Optimatics, which we kind of expected when we change one regulator, it impacts every regulator. So every time we optimize one, we have to go to another, just shifted the flows around. So it didn't give us as many alternatives as we liked, but we did end up with, we thought, with some very good alternatives in the end. So this is kind of the short list of the retained. There are tens of thousands of permutations. This is a short list. So these are ones we retained but weren't recommended. First one was in HARLEM River, which we call HAR 1 and HAR 2. These weren't retained. We called it because it wasn't cost effective. The other issue here, this also included change the actual, not the branch interceptor, the interceptor itself, upsizing it. And this was linked to the inward upzoning or rezoning. Since it was linked to that and that didn't pass, we didn't want to have a mandate linked to that. So we may do this in the future when we do sewer work there, but we don't want this as a mandated project. When we get to HUD 1, that wasn't retained just because we also have a HUD 2 I'll show later that was more cost effective. When we get to these East River ones, these really had to do more relocation. So we had ER1 and ER2 in the Hunts Point area. So as we started changing these regulators, it was sending more flow to Bronx River. So again, we didn't want to take water from the open water sending into the Bronx River, so these weren't retained or recommended. And lastly, we had a few in the Tolman Island drainage area. A similar thing with the relocation of flow. ER3 and ER4, we were taking flow and it was going into Flushing Creek. So those we don't want to retain due to Flushing Creek. We kind of noticed that the reason was that these included work at TI 22. So that last one, ER 5, we said, what if we eliminate TI 22 and just do TI 13 and rid of TI 13, doing a bending weir? That one we say is not cost effective. What actually happened is when we did the bending weir, we also enlarged the orifice, sending more flow to the interceptor. That happened to be a sensitive area that was flooding in the past, so we didn't want to risk anything sending more flow to that interceptor. So that wasn't recommended. However, these were recommended. So again, HUD 2, I mentioned HUD 1. Very simple. I'll get into some more details there, but that one we thought was cost effective and no other issues. ER 6, this was a takeoff of ER 5. And this involved the bending weir without upsizing the orifice, so we're not sending any additional flow into that interceptor during those peak storms. And we also did some work at outfall TI3. So that one definitely seemed viable and a pretty good CSO reduction. Red Hook, we found this one right away, and just at RH outfall RH5 and RH14. I'll talk about that a little later. The next one, NYB2. This one we call a gravity connection from Victory Boulevard into the Hannah Street. It goes into the interceptor, rather, the Hannah Street pump station. Again, I'll show a graphic on this. This was an old concept we had that we brought back. And lastly, a new one we came up with, this didn't come out of the Optomatics, is when we started looking at OH15. It's one of the biggest outfalls. And I'll get into a little more details, but we noticed the upper barrel was being underutilized. So there was some real-time control trying to optimize the CSO reductions. So getting just a little more detail to give it more of a geographical basis where these are, showing the outfalls we're talking about. This is that HUD 2 I talked about that impacts 3 outfalls. And all this one is simply opening up the orifice. Like I said, you have an orifice going to a branch interceptor. Sometimes you have an orifice like a 12-inch square gate going to an 18-inch round branch interceptor. So sometimes just opening that up to 18 inches and trying to get as much flow as possible. So this one was that simple. 10 million gallon reduction at those outfalls, 7 million gallons per year overall, at a cost of $3 million. This one is the more substantial one, the ER6, like I said, it was a refinement of some of the earlier East River ones without any relocation into the Bronx, into Flushing Creek. So we were talking about an 86 million gallon per year reduction, and this includes a bending weir at the regulator upstream of TI-23 and some regulator modifications and orifice adjustments at TI-3. And again, 86 million gallons, that cost is $6 million. And activations reduced by 34 activations per year. NYB1 is the one I mentioned, again, a simple one with Red Hook involving 2 outfalls, RH5 and 4, shown on the map. And again, this was both raising the weir and some adjustments to the orifice. The NYB2, the Hannah Street one, as I said, this is an old concept, kind of an interesting one, where a bunch of the Staten Island this whole lower part of Staten Island all goes to a Hannah Street pump station, then gets pumped over into an interceptor and to the Port Richmond plant. Some elevations, particularly over here, it's very high. The Victory Boulevard elevation is really high, so there's no need to bring it all the way down to the pump station, waste the energy, pump it back. So all we did is we built a diversion chamber in that large combined sewer and send the flow by gravity into the interceptor to the treatment plant, both dry weather and wet weather. So that one had CSO benefits, it had some energy benefits. And the last one, again, this was one of the newer ones for NYB3. It involves some real-time control involving a real-time control sluice gate. And as I said, this OH15 is one of the bigger outfalls. We tried flow monitoring there, but you only do the upper level. I mean, I forget the size of these. It's like 15 by 15 over a 15 by 15 foot barrel. These are tremendous. But again, when we were doing the flow monitoring, other things, and our modeling, we noticed the upper barrel being underutilized. So we put a gate there for the small storms. We were trying to keep more flow in the upper barrel. And during big storms, we open the gate up and it's not to impact the hydraulic grade line upstream and cause any flooding. So this one, again, it was 90 million gallon per year reduction. It cost about $5 million. So it's a very interesting one. I looked at, I didn't talk about the reductions. A lot of the ones had significant reductions. This one had a huge CSO volume decrease, but the reductions went slightly up by 3. And this is, again, the complexity of the system. Even though you're doing this work at 1 outfall, it impacts 7 outfalls. So the volume drops at OH15 by 150 million gallons per year, but goes up at 6 other outfalls by 60 million gallons per year. And it just so happens that each of those outfalls had 1 more activation per year under this scenario. So, but overall, we still think this makes a lot of sense in terms of CSO reduction. Going back again, water quality attainment, this looks similar to the first table we showed you. Again, very high attainment overall. As I mentioned, Arthur Kill and Kill Van Kull, there's some issues, but again, not associated with CSO. And the red X doesn't look as good, but when you look at spatially and temporally, it's much better than that. It's a lot of months are in full attainment. Still some projected issues, not with the Intero 30-day, but with the Intero STP. Again, that's a 90th percentile of greater than 130 CFU per 100 milliliters. But again, when you look at the New York Bay, most is in full attainment. It's just that near shore, near the lower bay, right near Brooklyn there and Gravesend Bay. And dissolved oxygen, again, looks good. All the areas, every cell in there greater than 95%. And with the exception of a portion of the Arthur Kill, again, only a small portion, more like those dead-end embayments. So overview of the recommended plan, I mean, geographically it's kind of spaced out. So again, the Tibbetts we mentioned earlier, it's a big project, but it's part of the baseline with the estimated cost right now about $63 million, 228 million gallon per year reduction in the Harlem River. Again, we hit some of these other ones. We have the HUD 2 over in the Hudson River. In the Upper East River, we have the ER6. In the Lower East River, we have the RH project. New York Bay, we have the OH15, the real-time control, as well as the Hannah Street gravity diversion. So that's kind of the recommended plan in a nutshell in terms of the benefits. So in addition to the 228 on the Tibbetts Brook, we're looking at about a 241 million gallon per year reduction. Here's kind of a breakdown. Again, significant reduction in the CSO activations. And projected escalated costs for this project. These projects is about $72 million on top of the $9 billion investment to date, or commitment to date. Any questions?
Thank you. So, questions. I see our council members. Please.
Good evening. So I'm New York City Councilmember Brad Lander. I represent the Gowanus water body, and it's an honor to be here with Councilmember Antonio Reynoso and so many advocates here as well. Let me say a couple of things about what I appreciate first, and then the big concerns that I have. So first, I really do want to appreciate that the folks up here are people who really care passionately about this work and your love of the green infrastructure and your work with us over time and your knowledge of these issues is clear and strong. And we know that you really work on and care about these issues. And I'll just say personally, in Gowanus, which is the place that I've worked with you the most, there obviously has been a really serious, investment, some really serious plans, and that the combination of what's been done with the flushing tunnel, with green infrastructure, with the tanks. I appreciate that you proposed the tunnels that would go even bigger, with the dredge, are going to get us significant improvements in Gowanus. And I also appreciate the work you've been doing with us already, thinking about the new unified stormwater rule. As you know, we've sent a real bottom line in Gowanus that the Gowanus rezoning cannot pollute the canal with any additional CSOs, and I'm optimistic with the work that we're doing together that we'll be able to achieve that goal. So I appreciate all of that. At the same time, I guess in terms of this plan and how we're looking forward, it feels to me like it's just barely a drop in the bucket of meeting the broad need, at least as I understand it. We're talking about something like more than 10, maybe more than 11 billion gallons of CSOs entering the open waters each year, and that this plan to reduce that by $241 million is not even a 3% reduction, and that $72 million, when just what's going into Gowanus is going to be over $1 billion, is not a serious effort yet on all our parts to put the resources in that are necessary to achieve a genuinely broad effort in our next long-term control plan. So, I mean, there's also a set of issues around the assumptions and achieving 100% rather than 95%, and obviously, as people have raised with you, making real projections for increased precipitation and sea level rise, and a million details that I don't know that we understand really well enough to debate. But big picture, a $72 million investment to achieve a less than 3% reduction out of 10 billion gallons of CSOs into our open waters is just not, especially compared to everything you just showed us about the magnitude of the effort so far, is not going forward a serious effort to achieve the goals that we need.
God bless Brad Lander. I'm Councilmember Untitled also, and I'm happy to be here. I want to be honest about how much I know. I consider myself a self-proclaimed nerd. Love data, love information, and this stuff is tough to take in. And I don't know if that's intentional to some degree. You're just throwing so much data and so much information at us that we just don't know where to start when it comes to trying to be helpful, right? I want to make sure that we don't see this as an effort like us versus them. But I just, considering it's a long-term plan, lost opportunities is what I'm concerned about. When are we going to revisit this again? And are we losing short-term opportunities right now that can start addressing the issue in a more meaningful way than what we're seeing when it comes to this the 72 million? And whether or not we as council members have done our part to really push the administration of the city to do better. So for me, I just want to take pause and see if, I don't want this to be the end. I don't want my comments to be taken here and just moved along. I really want to have a conversation about making a significant impact on this work, and there's a lot of opportunities that I just don't see here. So for me, it's about slowing down and really understanding what's happening outside of a lot of the details that I saw in front of me, so that we can start, again, just doing better than what we have here, which is, again, the 241 million. Really, no pun intended, is a drop in the bucket to the work that we need to do with the CSO stuff. So that's my big concern. So see me as an ally to everyone in this room. I'm going to continue to go through this crash course of understanding what's happening here. But in that time, while I'm learning, I hope that this process isn't moving so fast that we're kind of done with long-term planning. And then just leave it with it's climate crisis has to be taken seriously. And does this plan make us proud that we've done that in New York City? Is a question that I'll pose. So
it's like we need our own sluice gate for the process, so we can slow down the. Anyway, sorry, never mind. I just want to ask one question about one specific thing which relates to the council, because the city council did pass the Inwood rezoning. It's true that some people are suing, but we passed it, and if what I heard is right, even though we passed it because some people have sued, you're punishing the people uptown and taking away a planned investment to improve water quality as a result of rezoning politics, because that would not be okay.
No, it wasn't. Nothing didn't mean to do that, but with that uncertainty, we wouldn't do that project by itself. The only way it would make sense if we knew we were upgrading the sewers. Because at one point they were talking about relocating the interceptor from the railroad yard over, I think, to 10th Avenue. And this whole project relies on that. So we don't want to go in there and do this and then come back with the drainage plan 5 years later. We want to make sure we coordinate. So we're still going to work with our BWSO who does the drainage plans and get these benefits in. We don't want it under a mandated project with two different schedules. So that was our only concern. And water quality-wise, I don't think it's going to impact there. Again, mostly open waters, 100% attainment. So, but it was really the coordination with the sewer work. We want to make sure when we go in there and do that work, we know that work's going forward in terms of so many other priorities.
Okay, that still sounds like yes, when the rezoning was passed, we agreed to do it. And then a lawsuit was brought against the rezoning, and so now we're pulling it back.
We never agreed to do it. It's something we considered. It's kind of out of the box. We said, well, listen, we know they're moving this interceptor. We typically don't look at that. What if we did something to help it out? But again, if they're not going to move forward, we don't know the timing of the sewer work. It wouldn't make sense to link this to a sewer project. We don't know the scope yet. So it's really the timing was the issue.
So just to clarify a little bit, Council Member, the projects that we're talking about here today, if end up being submitted as part of the LTCP, then approved by DEC, then as Keith is saying, then they become mandated projects with very specific timetables that were held to by the state. So as you know, because there's a tremendous amount of coordination that happens through the rezoning process, particularly as it relates to drainage planning, the idea is that to allow time and space for that coordination, it would not be included for this at this stage, but that doesn't mean that it wouldn't go forward, because as you know, we often do many projects associated with rezoning. It's really about the coordination and the timing, not about punishment.
And I'll just say this, and then there's a lot of people here that know a lot more about this than we do, and it's already pretty late in the evening. But look, I appreciate that there's a negotiation dynamic here. It's logical for the city to only ask to be mandated to do as little as possible. I guess we're all a little like that. Like if we got to propose what standards we'd be held to and what mandates other people would have legally on us, I suppose even if we wanted to do a lot more, like if I had an exercise regime at the gym, I might say, I'd like to lose 20 pounds, but let's only mandate me to lose like half a pound. And then if I do more than that, great. But just don't like hold me accountable for any more than a little. Like, so that is in part the dynamic here, but for the people of New York City, our goal is to say, given climate change, given where we are, we need to set ambitious plans. And there's like, it's scary to be held to ambitious plans we set, but this just really feels like saying more or less what I said, like I need to lose 20 pounds, but let's only mandate me to lose a half a pound, and hopefully I'll lose more, and we gotta do better than 2.4% reduction in the open water body in such a small amount. Let me
I forgot. I want the people that are smarter than me to speak. But we also had a hearing today related to Rikers Island. It's been a long time, and a lot of people showed up. And I'm just thinking of missed opportunities across the board when it comes to this long-term plan. So I'm just very concerned about, like Brad said, whether we really went all the way here or went anywhere. So I'm excited to hear the testimony from folks, and hopefully I could, again, advocate on it.
Of course, thank you both. I do just want to, you both said a lot, and I thank you for that. I do just want to touch on a couple of things that you pointed out. So the first, in terms of East River Open Waters, the $72 million in comparison to sort of $9 billion across the CSO program, is to keep in mind the slide that we showed earlier about meeting existing water quality standards in many of these water bodies. So as we're talking about balancing cost with the benefit, that's really our challenge. Because what we're saying is that, and I think Keith mentioned it, we ended up looking at over 100,000 permutations of potential projects. So that's a lot of alternatives that were looked at compared to the 5 that were presented here this evening. But as we look at each of those alternatives, we have to look at what's the benefit and what's the risk. So if we have a potential project that could reduce CSOs out of one outfall, but is going to cause flooding in homes upstream, that's obviously a concern and something that we're not going to move forward. So taking into account the hydraulic grade lines, the design of the system itself, and how complicated the sewer system is, that's how we ended up with these alternatives at these costs, bearing in mind that we are meeting water quality standards in these areas. And then Councilmember Reynoso, to your point about how technical this presentation is, this is something that we've been challenged with since we first kicked off this program back in 2012, because we are talking about sort of heady engineering topics. We're talking about modeling, we're talking about wastewater treatment. It is not our intention to sort of confuse folks, and we've really worked hard to create materials and better maps and to try to engage folks as best as we can. But I do think that we're going to continue to be challenged with that because we do have a very sophisticated stakeholder group that has really serious questions. So we want to make sure that we're answering those questions, but also balancing that with the fact that folks are coming here that are interested in green infrastructure, interested just in water quality in general. So if you or your team have recommendations on ways that we can improve to make information more accessible, we're happy to take that feedback. And then to your point about sort of where we are in the conversation, the process, the timeline, yes, we do have a deliverable to the state March 2020. So at this point, that timeline is no longer negotiable. We've already had to push out the dates for this LTCP. I think originally it was due in December 2017, and now we're at March 2020. So from that perspective of DEP and DEC and our consent order, we're no longer able to push that out. This plan will be submitted in March, but our stakeholder engagement doesn't stop at that time. We'll continue to interact, we'll continue to have meetings. Every single one of our approved LTCPs that has an associated project will have project-related meetings. So it's not like, okay, we're done now, DEP goes back to our office in Left Rack and never talks to the community again. We'll continue to have these conversations as our implementation goes forth. So with that, I do want to start taking some other questions. So Tracy?
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I have to say I'm really confused about the data where you're saying that we're meeting water quality standards for dissolved oxygen, especially up in Long Island Sound. I'm looking at the report that comes out, and I know you're familiar, Connecticut State DEP monitors these waters with the Interstate Environmental Commission, the IEC, and I have their reports open on my laptop of all their recent surveys that show these waters not meeting dissolved oxygen criteria multiple times every summer for years and years and years, and there's a big EPA effort to address the fact that we have hypoxic, so below the 0.3% dissolved oxygen levels in that water body, and there's all these other efforts we're doing to address this really serious issue of low dissolved oxygen, but now your data is saying that you're meeting criteria in that area. So are you not looking at the Interstate Environmental Commission data and looking at Connecticut State's data? How can there be such a big disconnect on dissolved oxygen in this water body?
I think the big disconnect, when we started this program, we sat down with DC trying to define what parameters we'd be looking at. So we looked at typical things from bacterial in terms of the monthly GO mean, the enteral things we were assessed against. For DO, we agreed that we look at DO attainment in terms of an annual average. So I think the annual average we use is probably the majority of the reason. But the one other thing to point out is when we do look at CSO, it has minimum impact on dissolved oxygen. So even if you do 100% CSO capture, it's going to move it by such a small increment. I mean, it's not where you look for dissolved oxygen.
But I think you have to use the established, DEC criteria of how you look at meeting, attaining water quality criteria. You can't just set a new standard that it's an annual average when it's not an annual average. That's not how the state assesses meeting.
Right, but this was agreed upon with the state back in 2012.
But this is just really misleading to the public to say that these waterways are meeting dissolved oxygen criteria when they're not, and we're simultaneously investing, billions of dollars to address this problem in wastewater treatment plant upgrades and other things. And maybe CSOs aren't going to move the needle tremendously, but they're part of the input. And I just think it's wrong to misrepresent the water quality conditions, no matter what, whether you're going to move that needle or not. I just find this is fundamentally dishonest data.
So I think that that's a fair point, in part because we should probably show a bit of a worst case, or at least a range with respect to DO, since there's always such a big range in dissolved oxygen levels depending on the season and depending on the location. So I think that's a fair point. And again, as Keith stressed, the only reason here that we didn't work a lot on the DO issues is because this is really a fine-grained look at CSO impact. And CSOs are known to not have a big impact on dissolved oxygen levels. So I don't want to debate this. I just want to say that we totally agree that this issue, the dissolved oxygen issue, needs a lot of additional attention, and therefore we are working in cooperation with the EPA on a huge study for Long Island Sound. So we are definitely going to be hitting that issue very soon. As you know, we have an advisory board that will be established, and we have a contract that is being prepared now and in final negotiations to really study the issue of Long Island Sound and its embayment. So there'll definitely be more attention to your concerns. So I think it does deserve the attention that you're highlighting.
I appreciate that, but I think it needs to be accurately reflected that we're not meeting DO.
Okay, thanks for that comment. I think we can do a better job of probably incorporating or highlighting some additional data. Thank you.
Hello.
Thanks, Michael. And so I just want to touch on a couple of things, both about I'm not going to dwell on the process too much, but I do have to speak to it a little bit, and the substance. So this is the document, in addition to the PowerPoint presentation, this is the document that we're being given to review, and I assume we'll be given some period of time where you'll invite written comments, right? So this is 92 pages, a lot of which is glossy photos and very pretty. And it's kind of makes a reality of what we're talking about. It kind of brings home what these water bodies are, what our waterfront is, why we should care, right? But it's 91 pages, a lot of it is pretty graphics, glossy photos, so forth. A full long-term control plan, the Flushing Bay plan, for example, was 320 pages of fine print, right? With all sorts of technical graphs, tables, so forth, right? When we're being asked to swallow this idea of the drop in the bucket and what we're getting in order to evaluate whether it makes sense is this. And what you're going to be submitting to the state is multiple hundreds of pages that took you years and millions of dollars of technical analysis and consulting to produce, and all sorts of technical assumptions that went into it, all sorts of financial assumptions that went into it, and this is what we get to review and comment on? That's just unacceptable. It's just unacceptable. So I have to say that at the outset. Beyond that, so I think the drop in the bucket characterization sounds exactly right from what I've been able to see in the half hour that I've had a chance to see it. And I mean, to break it down, you've got for the East River, you're proposing to spend $6 million to reduce 86 million gallons per year of CSOs out of 5 billion gallons of CSOs that go into the East River. For the Hudson River, you're proposing to spend $3 million to reduce 7 million gallons out of 770 million. For the Upper and Lower Bay, you're proposing to spend $33 million to reduce 148 million gallons a year out of 3 billion. It's just hard to take it with a straight face, to be honest. I mean, I hate to be blunt about it, but there's been a lot of years building up to this. There's been a lot of other plans, a lot of disagreements about other plans, but when you look at this plan being for the largest portion of the city's waterways, for half of the CSO volume in the city, and that's the degree of investment and the degree of CSO capture that you're talking about achieving with it, it doesn't add up. And that just brings me to the last point that I want to make to tie it together. And
what is the goal here? Right? It seems to me that throughout all of these years, and again here today, that it's the way these plans have been presented, the way the analyses have been done to justify decisions, it's a bit of a game. It's a bit of a game around calculating statistics intended to claim compliance with a certain standard that does not represent the clean water ambitions and goals that people of New York City have. And after doing all those statistical analyses, the claim that's made by DEP is, we're doing great, we'll have clean water when we spend this little bit of money. It's great. And that doesn't add up either. Right? There's this whole issue of the 95% compliance being deemed compliance. I would like to know, where did DEC tell you that and what did they justify that on? That's the metric. It doesn't appear anywhere in the law. I'd like to know, is this compliance, are you averaging across all of the locations within the water body? Are you representing this for selected locations within the water body? There were some questions about this in the last go-around in the fall, and the answers that came back on Monday in a written response from DEP talked about how there's a mosaic of grid cells that shows for each individual location what the compliance percentage is. I don't see that presented up here. I don't see that presented in here, so that we can know how different areas are doing relative to each other within a water body.
Larry, can I ask you to pause if, in fact, you want a response to all of these comments? I'm starting to lose track, so I'm wondering if you want us to take the comments that you've made thus far and then continue, or how do you want to do this?
A couple of them are, I mean, just, I'll try to be brief and sum up, but some of those
You're making a lot of great points, and I would like to address them.
Thematic comments, right? And I do have a few sort of more specific ones that if we don't have time to get to all of them today, and I'm not going to list all of my specific questions either. But I'll lay out a couple of specific ones. This question, where did DEC come up with 95%? Why is that what the target is? Right? What is the water quality that's going to be achieved in particular places, and not just in the aggregate for a water body? Why is DEP not showing, as you did for other plans, what the performance would be relative to the Enterocockus standard? Right? Even for other plans, when that was not the governing standard according to DEC, that analysis was still done and that result was still presented, so the public could see what we'd be getting. I'll leave it at that for now. One more. Why is water quality standard compliance, particularly given that the standards are weak? Why is that the only metric that we're looking at here? It's a check in a box, literally a check in a box, right? Compliance. Notwithstanding billions and billions and billions of gallons of overflows, dozens and dozens and dozens of times per year, right, that are not going to be rectified. Why is checking the box the metric that we go by here to decide whether this is a good plan? That's my last question.
So before the DEP side starts to dig into those a bit, I do want to introduce Linda Allen, who's here on behalf of DEC, who can take the 95th percentile question.
Yeah, but Larry, the rationale behind picking 95%, this was discussed back in 2012 when the state and the city were first laying out the baseline conditions and the assumptions that were going to be used for the model. And given that the decision-making for all these LTCPs is not based on actual data being taken, but it's based on model projections, okay? And there's always some level of uncertainty in any model. We felt that a level of 95%, if the model was projecting 95%, that we would feel confident that, or not confident, but it would be within a level of confidence that the water body would likely attain the full attainment. It didn't need to be 100%. And the reason for that is that the standard is monthly geomean. So if the water body is not in attainment for 1 month, that would be 8% of the time. Therefore, the model would project that it would be at 92% attainment. Okay, if you've got the model projecting that the water body was at 92% level of attainment, that would mean it was out of attainment one month out of the year. given that, if the model is projecting at least 95% level attainment, then it's in full attainment. It'd have to be at least 92% or less from the model perspective to be in non-attainment for 1 month out of the year. Does that make sense? Because
I hear what you're saying. I'm not sure I agree yet.
Well, it's based on modeling, and the standard is a monthly geomean, and therefore it has to meet 12 months out of the year.
Is it calculated based on
Could you turn on your mic, Larry?
Is it calculated based on 12 calculations of calendar months, and that's what the model is calculating, or is it a rolling 30 days? What is it being measured by the model? But also just one second point that you talk about uncertainty in a model. There's uncertainty in two directions in a model, right? If you come up with 95%, you say, well, maybe that means 100%. It may also mean 80% or 85%. What's the range of uncertainty? What's the sensitivity testing that's been done of different assumptions and different error bars within this modeling method? To say 95, to spit out one number from a model that happens to be equal to or greater than 95%, and say that one number therefore means we can assume it's probably going to be 100%, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, I mean, I don't think we have time tonight to get into all the details and the validity and the calibration efforts the city has made with their model. I mean, this was looked at, like I said, 8 years ago. We understand, I mean, I can't give you a specific number, like we know the model is for sure within plus or minus 3% or plus or minus 5%, but we feel that a 5%, plus or minus 5%, was a reasonable assumption for this model based on the information at that time, that the information that the city was giving us based on their calibration and their validation efforts. And in terms of, the decision making within the DC, I don't work directly for, I'm not a DC employee, but obviously I am assigned to work under the program. I work for the New England Interstate. But this was discussed with not only the people within the Bureau of Water Compliance, but also within the Bureau of Water Assessment and Management and the Bureau of Water Permits, up there at DC. So it wasn't just a decision that was taken very lightly. I mean, we talked within, a wide range of the offices there to make sure everybody was going to be comfortable at the end of the day when the city came to us and said, here's our model, it's projecting 97% or 83%, when do we say you're in attainment or you're not based on a model? Okay, we know models are not perfect, but we, to hold them to 100%, oh, you have to show it's an 100% attainment in your model in order for us to say, okay, you're in attainment, we didn't feel that that was a reasonable thing to do, because we know models are there's some uncertainty. So the 95% was decided upon, was chosen, and like I said, based on the fact that you would get a 92% model projection of attainment, in order for it to be at least 1 month out of attainment, we felt that the 95% was reasonable. It would cover us for that respect.
I'd somebody from DEP to speak to that. Thank you. Okay. I appreciate it. I mean, and I think some follow-up conversation I'm sure would be helpful. But can somebody from DEP just speak to the question about the modeling methodology? Does the percent represent a number of months divided by 12 that it's in or out of compliance, or is there a rolling 30-day geomean that's being calculated by a continuous simulation model, or what?
For fecal coliform, we go with the standard. It's a monthly, strictly a monthly geomean, not a rolling. So in terms of rolling 30-day, the fecal coliform standard is a monthly geomean.
So it's a continuous simulation model, and it measures, it kind of takes
each year, you'll take the June reading, you'll take each month, and it'll just calculate the geomean for that month.
Okay.
Thanks and the model does have some conservatism in that when we run it annually, again, we run 10 years of runs, and we also take the winter data. So a lot of times, like you'll see non-compliance in a February month when no one's using the water, and part of the reason too is we take the NOAA precipitation data, which is actually a snow event. So it's really not a CSO, but we try to be a little more conservative in terms of our projections.
And just one other thing about the modeling data, unlike some cities, we have been very heavily weighting the more recent data that for precipitation. So we've been indicating more heavily weighting the last 10 years that we think are more indicative of the climate change scenarios instead of what some in the engineering sphere may do, which is to look at 50 years of data and average that. So there are lots of levels of conservatism in the model, and we should be able to provide that response to comment for you.
Yes, sir, in the math hat.
What if your child was swimming on that month when you fell from those standards? Hyman Rickover believed in dealing with tolerances. And you really, I think, have to look at minimums and maximums and not averages.
I agree with that concern. That's why there are other requirements for notifications for conditions when there may be CSOs occurring. And we always say that you really should not be swimming within 24 to 48 hours of major storm events near any of our major CSO outfalls, which we've tried very hard to highlight. Not an ideal condition, but I think again, we have to remember that, and I know today is about what more can we do, and I don't want to harp on what we have done. I don't want to rest on our laurels. That's not the point. I certainly don't want to debate anybody because we really do want to solve this problem together, and we're glad that we have so many like-minded people with concerns as you do. But these sewer systems were really built over time, so they're not ideally designed, right? So first we had sewers that sent everything to the receiving water bodies. And then we had 1972 and the Clean Water Act and, pollution prevention. And then we rung our city with these interceptors. Our 14 wastewater, sorry, Pam, say it.
Water resource recovery.
Okay. WRRFs now treat 2.4 million gallons a day during dry weather. They have that capacity. We've been able to bring down our demand through the city, so we actually have even greater capacity than we otherwise did 10, 15, 20 years ago. But what happens, during these rain events is that we're trying to take all of these flows in the system and bring it through the interceptor to the 14 plants. And if you understand the laws of physics, that's just not possible. So we're really trying to work backwards to solve this problem. And we ultimately want to see zero CSOs. That's what we ultimately want to see. But I would submit to you that today we can't afford that. There are too many, and that's why I spent so much time at the early part of the presentation. And that is why we now have congressional legislation at the highest levels, and that EPA has now endorsed what is known as integrated planning to really look at the pressures of all of the spending, not just on the mandate, but the other pressures as well, and to come up with priorities. This isn't about what we do and what we can't do necessarily, and I think we've been a little bit of a victim of our own success because this is at the tail end of 10 long-term control plans, as Larry indicated. We are now at $9 billion plus in investments that have to be made over the next 20 to 25 years. That debt service is going to mount, and we have to be very conscious of the impact on the ratepayers. And that's not to suggest that maybe we shouldn't have a more audacious plan, but the reality is that we are looking at water quality standards. That was the assignment. That is what we are required to do. So we are taking a look at the opportunities and the reasonable, cost-effective ways in which to reduce these CSOs at this point in time. We're not done. We won't be done. I don't believe we'll ever be done until we apply limits of technology and reduce all CSOs, because it's a really bad practice. But we're just, we just can't afford that.
I wasn't criticizing your efforts. I was suggesting that it's a better way to measure them. Last year you were talking about hurricane surges, and you were looking at maximums and minimums. You were applying that methodology to the surges. I think we should also look at the surges instead of only the averages.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to run, but I guess want to ask one final thing here before. obviously, we want, a Green New Deal. We want significant federal resources so that we can invest more money in without passing it along to the ratepayers. That is clear. And but I'm struck by this chart on 46 because, like, a way I think of this is, what if we were, willing to spend $1 billion on, how much reduction in CSO and other improvements could we get? But there's this giant gap on this page where you've offered us we either will spend 24 million or 5 billion, and 5 billion sounds unreasonable, right? I can't go and propose in this year's budget, let's increase the capital budget by $5 billion in order to get a 2.7 billion gallon reduction in CSOs. So if we were to push and say, what if we added $500 million to the budget? What if we, are there some analyses that look at it from that point of view? If we're willing to be ambitious and spend some more of our capital budget in a way that is reasonable and beyond 72 million, or if we're fortunate to get an infrastructure, a federal government that will put some infrastructure investments in, what is 500 million, $1 billion, $2 billion more? How could you guys spend that in ways that would achieve substantial improvements beyond what we're doing? Is that an analysis that is part of this? I understand you might not want to say to DEC, please turn around and mandate us to do it before we have the money, but how can we move forward to set that kind of ambitious goal that then we can push for together?
No, I just want to say that I think that question deserves a more in-depth analysis and thought. I'm not going to give an off-the-cuff response to that.
Thank you. Okay, sir in the math hat, we got you.
I appreciate all the work that you guys are doing, but I guess speaking from as a personal user of one of the waterways here, specifically Flushing Creek, I can only speak to my experience of using it, where I go out during the summertime 3 days a week, 4 days a week, and especially after a rainfall, the conditions are disgusting. And it seems very disingenuous for you to say that the water quality is great when anecdotally, at least after one of these rainfalls, I've experienced where a whole crowd or group of fishes are just dead and on the surface of the water. And articles written around that time mentioned that DEP did not measure certain things. And so my biggest point about this is that these numbers all mean great, but speaking as a user, and what does this actually mean for our user experience and how this water quality will get improved over time is my main point to this.
So I'm trying to quickly go to one of our maps. So that's a very fair point, particularly for Flushing Creek. And for that particular water body, we did submit a long-term control plan. We did have a lot of public meetings related to that LTCP. What we're talking about here this evening and the scope and the conversations we're having about water quality standards and meeting current standards is not specific to Flushing Creek or to the other tributaries that you're referring to. So we're talking about, sort of, as Angela said in the beginning, these much larger water bodies like East River, Hudson River, and so that's why it would seem like there's a disconnect between what you're seeing in Flushing Creek and what we're talking about this evening, because tributaries like Flushing Creek, Gowanus Canal, the Jamaica Bay tributaries, where they are largely man-made, very narrow, very little natural flushing, you do see the impacts of CSO sort of much more imminently after a rain event. So we understand that. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Holly Porter Morgan. I wanted to get a little bit more clarification about the actual model, because we understand that these water quality standards compliance are based on a model. So I'm very curious, I'm looking at page 18 in the packet that you gave us, and according to this, I'm really curious what actual data went into the model and where it was collected, like where are the actual locations that are behind what you interpolated into this model? Because I'm looking at what you listed at the top of this page, and it says that their CSO bacteria concentrations are from 14 CSO outfalls. That's what it says here. The stormwater bacteria concentrations are from 20 MS4. That's what it says, and then it says down here, and then it says that the water quality model calibration is from New York Harbor Sentinel locations and the New York Harbor survey monitoring stations, right? So I have those in front of me, and for instance, that would mean that, for instance, for New York Bay, that this whole area was interpolated from around 3 or 4 or 5 points, just based on what I'm looking at. So I think it would be really useful for us looking at what you gave us, if we could maybe eventually see the actual data behind the model. Because then also you said that, and I think it sounds like an amazing model, but it'd be great to see what goes into the model. Because I know it also says that there are 169 locations that the water quality model calibration, but then when we asked about how the citizens' data, and that would include the citizens' data, thank you, Rob, but then when we asked about the citizens' data, how it was used, you said that it was used for validation, not calibration, so that wouldn't include the citizens' data in that 100, that's part of that 169, right? It wasn't used to calibrate, it was used to validate, which are different things. So
Right.
I'm really curious, I really want to know exactly what went into the actual, what's behind this interplay.
Okay,
line.
we can get that. And again, the
That's
models
great.
were developed back in the 90s. I mean, so there was a lot of calibration back in 95, 96. Then we just did a lot of more sampling in terms of the LTCP, in terms of bacteria and things. But there's a lot that went into it. It also has feeds from all the treatment plants from Jersey. It's a huge model, but we can get you a lot of the background on it and the
That'd be
more
great.
recent. Yeah.
It's important because if we're basing attainment of water quality across all of this, we would, as people here, like to know what locations we're basing that on and we're interpolating it from in the model. That'd be great.
Yeah, and I that's a great point, and I just wanted to highlight, so I pulled up our website here. So one of the comments we received after the last public meeting was very similar to what you said about the data that was collected and was used. So we have made that available online at our website, so you can download each of the spreadsheets, and I think several people in the audience have, but you can also see our sampling map that shows many of our sampling locations. So that's available online now. And then, of course, if you have any questions about what you're reviewing in this material, you're more than welcome to submit them to us. And as Keith said, we'll be happy to answer them because we do appreciate the fact that we're talking about a lot of data spread out over a large period of time with very complex modeling methodologies, and so we're happy to take the time to explain it. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned earlier that Flushing didn't accurately represent these open water bodies, but I work at Pier 40 at Hudson River Park River Project, and after CSO, you see the same amount of trash in the water. It's disgusting. Visitors to the park notice it, and in your maps, you show that Hudson River Park is one of the high-level access points. There are lots of kayaking and things like that, and it's dangerous to people. I'm a Hudson River educator. I have students in the water all the time, even outside your sampling season, starting in March. We're interacting with the water. Students are interacting with the water, and when you look at the HUD 1 plan, it's addressing some of the smaller CSOs, which aren't even particularly concentrated where most of the kayaking is. It doesn't have addressed a floatable control plan. So how is Flushing different from our sites, which is open water?
Yeah, that's been one of our biggest challenges since we first started working on this LTCP, because we do know that there are so many
access points, and that, of course, because the CSO discharge is happening right at near the shore, that's where folks are seeing it. And I'm also a waterway user, so I appreciate that comment. What we're saying is that particularly for the Hudson River, the recommendation that we're putting forth, so this is HUD 2 and the outfalls that we're looking to address, was the best possible project that we could find for the Hudson River. And I know that that's challenging, and I know that, as folks said, it doesn't seem like it's enough in comparison to some of the other projects that we're doing. But again, as we're talking about protecting the upland communities and the rest of the sewer system, so not doing a project that would cause flooding, that's what I mean when I say that. That eliminated a lot of potential projects that we thought that we could get to. And we really pushed the team, and those of us sitting up here, Keith heard from us a lot about what can we do for these water body access points in the areas that folks have expressed the most concern about, because we've heard this since the beginning, and yet this was still the most cost-effective and feasible project that we could put forth. And so that's sort of the best response that I have to that, unless anyone has anything else to add.
Just another question then, if that's okay.
Sure.
So, Angela, you had also responded to another question, I think Willis's question about if a kid was in the water when, these CSO events occurred, that the DEP provides a notification for situations like that. But I get the New York alerts and they provide no information, and I think that those sorts of incidences are why we're losing trust on our end, because when I get an email that says, see DEC website below, see EDC website below, and that's the only information it gives, which is the email system that was updated a year and a half ago and somehow got less informative. How is there a better system rolling out at some point? Because I would want it. This is something I'd like to tell students about so they can be more informed and involved. But I can't tell students to get this email. It won't give them any information.
Yeah, so I think that you're referring to the NIALERT system, the state system. So I can't speak directly to the state system because that's not run by DEP. But if you are referring to Notify NYC, you're talking about the Notify NYC. Okay. Okay, so the Notify NYC alert system that we worked on, and you're right, we did update about a year ago based on feedback that we got from many of the folks in the room, gives information based, again, on the model. So what it does is it takes rainfall data from our wastewater resource recovery facilities, and it says, based on the fact that it's rained X amount, we predict that a CSO is happening, and we predict that it's impacting water quality in this way. We've heard feedback that doesn't go far enough for the Hudson River and for the East River, because again, because of this sheer sort of volume of these water bodies, the discharge amounts may not trigger like an advisory that water quality is harmed, I guess you could say. But in terms of where we go from here, I'm not actually able to say too much about it because, as I mentioned at our last meeting, the question of the water body advisory system is currently under a litigation, and so I'm not able to speak directly to that any further than I have. So
I understand that's based on modeling, but the models don't even appear in the emails. They used to.
What do you mean that they used to? I might have to talk to you offline about this, because when you do go to our website, it's much more informative than it had been. There's many more advisories than there used to be because of the updates that we did. But I'm happy to talk offline. Rob?
Okay, first of all, you started the meeting, sorry.
You started the meeting an hour late. You filled the first hour with stuff that wasn't really about this. So
I hope that we're prepared to stay longer and really address everybody's questions, because it's important. You can't slam this into 25 or 30 minutes. My question is really about this. It's kind of a similar issue to the Flushing Creek question and the questions that Melissa raising. Is that from the very beginning, we were worried about this process because it combines so much of the harbor into one thing. And the concern was that smaller water bodies, tributaries, or just coves and places where people use the water were going to get overlooked or steamrolled into the bigger picture. And it seems like that's what's happened. You say you have 260,000 cells, and none of these cells indicate that you're in anything but perfect attainment. But that's not possible. We know that from the tests that we do, that you're missing attainment in lots of places where people use the water. And so what we suggested, what we asked for and have asked for 8 years, is that you offer some analysis of those spots. Specific analysis, not that you fix all of those spots. We'd love it if you spent billions of dollars to fix them. We appreciate that you can't do that. But we ask that you analyze those spots and you tell us what was going on and what the consequences of your plan would be. And that really, as far as I can tell from reading the document that you gave us, that really hasn't happened. And we gave you a really big list. And I think a really good illustration of what I'm talking about is if you look at the map that you published on page 41 of the intersection of the East River, it shows 3 kayak launches. It shows a kayak launch at Howlett's Cove, at Stuyvesant Cove, and in Dumbo. You have 3 places where people launch. There are, by my count, there are at least 11 places on that stretch of the river where people launch in small boats. There's 11 places. Your map shows 3. What does that mean? It's a simple phone call. We're here. We want to work with you. We could just go over that map together. To me, it indicates that you don't take this idea seriously of looking at where people are using the water and what the consequences of your plan are going to be. And so this is something that doesn't even cost that much money. I'm not saying you need to build a new tunnel or it just means you gotta look closely at where people are using the harbor, and then you gotta tell them what's happening there. What is happening there? What's happening in Bushwick Inlet? What's happening in Wallenbout Channel? What's gonna happen? According to the fine print, your CSO discharges are actually going to increase in those places as a result of your earlier LTCPs. You got to be upfront about that and say that to people. That has to be part of the long-term control plan. Be upfront. Everybody knows you're doing the best you can and that resources are limited and it's a balancing act. Agreed. But something you can do that won't even cost that much is just to give the best possible picture. That could mean sharing your modeling results. It could mean putting some actual real-time meters on things. It could mean having a grant program for citizens groups who want to do those things. Give away, $50,000 to a group that's motivated to find a solution to metering. And yes, notification is ridiculous. Those texts. Have you ever had an advisory about the East River saying you can't go to the East River? It takes like 9 inches of rain to trigger that. That's not going to happen. But we know that there are times when your CSOs are pumping at max. Just say that. How hard is it to send a text saying that? So that's one aspect of the long-term control plan you can fix between now and March without having to spend any money. So I hope you do.
So it seems like a response may not be helpful at this point. So I think that what we can do is obviously take your comment down and follow up with you, because some of these things are conversations that we've been having for a while, and I think particularly on the water body advisory side, as you know, we were working closely with you on a new pilot to attempt some of the things that you're suggesting here. But again, just because of the current status, I'm just not able to speak more on that.
Forget the advisory part of it. Let's look at the map on page 41 and make sure that we add some.
Yeah, and I think that the places that we listed here were only like parks official access points. And so I appreciate the fact that that doesn't always correlate to where people are actually getting into the water. So we do know that, and we can work with you on it.
Great.
Angela, are you looking for a microphone? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm in a waterfront impacted community, and I'm on the community board, and I'm on the environmental committee, and I actually heard about this meeting from a local nonprofit because there was no outreach done to us there. So I'm hoping that going forward, over the next years that this is going through, that you include the impacted communities in your communication plan. I'm wondering what your communication and education plan is for those communities. How are you going to reach out to the people who are impacted by these things, who might not understand what CSOs are, but need to know what they should be looking for, and also how to hold you accountable?
Yeah, that's great feedback, and something that I would say that we have gotten better at over the years. We are certainly not perfect at it. So while we do notify all of the community boards about our meetings, we notify all of the elected officials, we understand that that doesn't always make it out to all of the members, but we come out to community board meetings, we go to Environmental Protection Committee meetings all of the time, and I'm happy to talk to you offline about how we can come to your meeting or your board so that we can talk more about this.
Sure, because I'm in Greenpoint, and we haven't had any presentations from you.
Yeah, understood. Willis?
Hi, thanks. So my question is about back to some of this data and the baseline. I think you've heard a lot of frustration tonight from people like myself that are directly impacted by the lack of action that's going to happen here, and the goal of the Clean Water Act of being fishable and swimmable not being truly perceived. And we understand that there's cost limitations, but it's a little frustrating. So, the baseline of this is that the standards that you're even pursuing are not even current federal guidelines. And so you keep, implementing and talking about this. We're in compliance with New York State DEC and what we agreed upon. There was an article the past few days in New York Times with this very catchy headline about EPA, Trump's EPA is going to allow cities to dump to dump raw sewage into its rivers for decades to come. And everyone likes to really get caught up in this idea that, Trump's EPA has taken, obviously they're doing horrible stuff, but the way that the city and the state have been operating, this is nothing new. And so, my question is twofold. One, at what point is New York State, I'm glad you're still here, going to actually enforce the new standards that have been in place for a few years? And two, you've mentioned a few times that this is an ongoing process. Yet we know that when a consent order is put in place, there are so limited opportunities for the community to go back and revisit and change those plans. As we've gone through with things like aeration, previous consent orders dealing with water quality. So those are the two questions. Whether DEC wants to answer this or DEP, when are we going to actually come into compliance with the rest of the country for Clean Water Act standards? And two, what is the actual process for adjusting these plans once they're approved, within a year or so? Because we're talking about, decades to come, the rest of our lives, that we're going to be dealing with these old standards. So there needs to be a better mechanism to address consent orders going forward.
Linda, did you want to speak to that at all?
A little familiar with that. I don't work on that directly. There's a whole separate group there at DEC that promulgates the new standards, and I know they've already put into place the Intero standard for parts of the New York City water body. I can't speak to what other actions they may be doing in the future, but I can certainly take back that question to them and let them follow up with you directly in terms of, they're aware that those standards are out there, that they've been put out by EPA, and they're, pursuing, actions to try and put them into effect here in the state, not just in New York City, but elsewhere in the state, and that's not an easy process for them. With respect to, when are they going to ensure that they're in a compliance? Well, that's That's a good question. I mean, it takes time to come into compliance with new standards. I can't speak to that issue, but then again, I can take your question back to them. And, those things will need to be incorporated into all the permits. I'm sure over the years, that's not something that probably would happen overnight. That takes time to update all the permits that are in the state. So the question about compliance, they'll have to address that as well. With respect to the process for updating the plans once these standards do come into effect, if you look at the approval letters that were for the LTCPs that have already been approved, you'll see that in there is a requirement for the city to do post-construction monitoring. Okay, once the projects are completed, they need to do post-construction monitoring, and the state has the authority to require the city to do additional CSO abatement if they believe it's necessary. Okay. Now, some of these projects go out for a couple decades. The tunnels that are going to be built at Newtown Creek and Flushing Bay, those are, we're looking at probably 2040 before those are done. So, we're not going to know what the benefits of those projects are for quite a while. But when those projects come into are completed, there'll be some post-construction monitoring, and at that point, they will, be able to determine if additional CSO abatement is required. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Nathan Kenson here for Curbed.com. My question, well, first I want to quickly follow up on what Rob said and point out that the map on page 55 for the Arthur Kill is also not showing some key official access points.
Okay,
But
thank you.
my question was actually, so the plan does not recommend any alternatives for the Kilvan Col, the Arthur Kill, and also the Harlem River, other than the Tibbetts Book daylighting. What does that really mean? Does that mean that is it fair to say there is no long-term control plan for those waterways? And if so, what do you say to the communities there that are on those waterways? And is there a potential that you could go back to the drawing board and create something for those three waterways, which are definitely some of the most polluted in the city?
It might have been missed in the early part of the presentation, but the Tibbetts Brook project is being pursued, but under what we call our baseline conditions. So the way the consent order between the city and the state was negotiated, our green infrastructure program, all of the green infrastructure that we build to meet our ultimate target, which is a reduction of 1.67 billion gallons of CSO by 2030, are part of the baseline. So it is a project that we are pursuing. It has a sort of deadline by 2030 in order to fit into that green infrastructure program. So it is a Harlem River project. It's just a part in a sort of different category, if that makes sense. And then for Arthur Kill and the Kilvan Col.
Yeah, so for the Kilvan Col, we did look at guess that would be the West Interceptor. And again, there was one outfall we were focusing on a lot. We tried almost every alternative, but hydraulic gray line wise, again, we were worried about flooding that area. I know, I forget the outfall number, but we looked at probably 100 different scenarios. We couldn't find anything that worked there. In terms of the Arthur Kill, that's actually not even a CSO tributary. We looked at it, but that's not under the CSO program. And I know New Jersey is also doing their long-term control plan. They have some outfalls over in that area too. They'll be looking in terms of CSO. And
I guess to follow up then, why were those part of your considerations if they were not really CSO, or why did you even include them in your studies if you weren't actually going to seriously consider them because they're not part of your CSO?
So, we actually asked that same question afterwards, but it was just, again, we were trying to be comprehensive for the citywide open waters. We just happened to be sampling there, and it's already in the model, so we just included it in there as a. And again, we do want to have this inform future programs in terms of MS4 and other programs. I mean, I know everyone's looking at this as the end, and councilmen and all, even when we do future upgrades, upzoning, if we rebuild the regulator, we're always going to look at opportunities to reduce CSO where we can, just not necessarily under a mandate, just when these come up. So again, these water bodies will always be looking at different ways in terms of an Angelo Borough integrated planning, but We just so happened we looked at everything just to understand the water quality and get a better understanding of the whole attainment and things, just for future reference.
Gentlemen, I know you've been waiting patiently. Thank you.
Hi, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I just want to first say that, I understand there's an economic component to this, but some cities like London and Boston, a lot of Midwestern cities have addressed this issue. And I understand that the constraints of a consent decree. And there's a lot of focus here on minimizing volume of CSO overflow. I think from the user's perspective, I'd like to maximize swimmable river models. And from an engineering perspective, if that's your metric, you come up with different designs. And I ask everybody, look what they did in London and look what they did in Boston. The other thing is, how do we evaluate success? We have sewers going back to the Civil War, some even to the Revolutionary War. London uses a design life of 120 years. Now, if you're designing an engineering project, when do you evaluate functionality? And that's at the 110 to 120 year mark. That's a 10-year period to evaluate. It's especially important now. We used to do rainfall like this. Climate change, rainfall is going up. City guidelines or state guidelines estimate 2099 it's going to be 30% more rainfall. If you use London's guidelines, it's 2140, it's even going to be more rainfall. We have to have a capacity to handle that rainfall. I'm not saying, I'm just saying when you evaluate the models, I think that's the scorecard. And the other thing is, they left, but the point about EPA standards, et cetera, I just want everybody to know, Clean Water Act came out in 1972, said fishable, swimmable by July 1st, not July 2nd, 1983. Are we there yet? No, we're not. And the question is, so Clean Water Act came out in 72. EPA released standards on fecal coliform, and in the intervening 10 years, they decided enterococci was the way to go. I want you all to know that New York State, they recently, for the outer waters, they're using enterococci. But for a lot of New York State waters, we're the only state in the country still using fecal coliform. And we're using geometric mean. That's nice, but I care about the maps on the day my kids are swimming. And that's just me. My recommendation is, my dream is that when you present this data, evaluate at the end of design life and use a speed limit in terracotta max, STV, and use that and make me happier. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Appreciate that. Julie?
So, you've heard our voices. We're not too satisfied with this proposed plan. What can we do now? What are we going to do? What's going to happen between now and the time that you have to send this plan in to the state for review? Is there an opportunity for you to go back to the drawing board to look at integrated planning in some way? What's going to happen? Can you tell us?
I'm going to my next step slide. And I in terms of whether it's possible to go back to the drawing board to look at, I need to go through because we're going to cut out a lot. But in terms of looking at integrated planning for this LTCP, no, because this is due in March. And so in terms of what you can do now, there is an opportunity to comment on the recommended plan, to submit your comments to us. We will respond to them. And then we will be submitting the plan in March. So whether or not there will be any sort of updates or changes to the recommendations that we have now, we'll get your feedback and we'll hear that. And if there's sort of a lot of opportunity to look at another alternative, we're happy to do that, but we are under a time constraint, and yeah, and I understand that that's disappointing, and I appreciate the fact that that's frustrating, but it's just the reality of where we are at this point in the process. Yes, sir.
Okay, I do understand that.
I'm sorry, could you hold off one moment? I was actually calling on the gentleman in the back.
Okay. I'm sorry, I just had a few comments and maybe suggestions, and some of this might help answer some of the questions from people without water backgrounds. And I'm a drinking water and wastewater expert, and have actually been working on New York City projects since 2003, and have actually been inside the sewers, the regulator chambers, the water resource recovery facilities, and have modeled the drinking water distribution system. But I've also worked on a lot of international projects and have lived overseas for a number of years. And maybe part of this is because I've worked in my own backyard for a long time, but I have to say the New York City water is the water I'm most proud of. But it's also because I've seen the water situation in a lot of cities, and when you think about everything New York City DEP is doing in terms of public outreach, sustainability initiatives, integrated water management, greenhouse gas reduction, they're really doing a great job. So I think, I'm here tonight as a citizen and not as a consultant. Water is something that, besides my family, I'm most passionate about, and so much so that when I go overseas on projects and meeting with rectors of universities or managers of water utilities, as a gift I bring a sample of New York City tap water because
that's awesome.
It's what's connecting us, but it's also because it's the water I'm most proud of. But that's why I feel like I have to be here tonight, and I think when you look at this long-term control plan, I guess I hope, or I think Keith answered the question that this isn't the end. And what you were just mentioning, that it doesn't mean that there isn't going to be other opportunities. And my suggestion is to give time and allow for these other opportunities to unfold. There's a lot of things happening. Data capabilities are improving every day. You have the Green New Deal. You have the Green Infrastructure Grant Program, the water reuse, on-site water reuse grant program. You have integrated water management, water efficiency initiatives. So I think with time, a lot of these things, a lot of these partnerships that have been successful will be coming together to create more opportunities. So I would hope that there is room for that, maybe not part of this long-term control plan, but maybe it's a larger program to realize some of those opportunities down the road. And I guess one question that I have, which a gentleman over there brought up, was in regard to the latest news regarding the Clean Water Act and EPA's dismantling of a lot of the protections. I was curious whether or not this would affect the long-term control plan, and if so, how, and if not the long-term control plan, and also with regard to the city's efforts.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. So I'm familiar with the article that Willis was referring to. My understanding is that the cities that were referenced in that article were ones that were negotiating their consent orders directly with EPA. We're in a different position because we negotiate with the state. And so my understanding is that what's happening on that side does not impact us in our existing consent order with the state in any way. I don't know if anyone has anything else to add to that, but it's just different. Before I come to you, I want to take one question from someone who hasn't asked yet. Is there anybody else that has a question? Ira?
Yeah, adding to what Rob Buchanan was saying,
Could you turn on your microphone, please?
Adding to what Ron Buchanan was saying, that if you paint a picture that's wonderful, no one wants to give any money to it. So you're really stuck in a rut. Also, I heard a lot about how you say you've got partnerships with parks and the other group, Partnership of Parks or something. But I was at a community board meeting the other night, and they're doing a big drainage proposal plan and research in Riverside Park, flooding, and the term DCP did not come up, which is like, do you have any partnership with Riverside Parks? Or is it just Queens and Bronx? And I'm very concerned. Because DEP really has know-how that Parks doesn't have.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. When I said about the partnership with parks, those parks that falls in our combined sewer areas, River, as you know, it's in a direct drainage area. I know where that park is. But, as you can imagine, we are all talking about the CSOs. We've been piloting some outside of our CSO areas, like we looked at Coney Island, parks, but current program funding is really trying to get as many park sites in the combined sewer areas potentially possible before we can expand our efforts. We expanded our grant efforts citywide, so it doesn't matter where you are in the city, CSO, MS4 Direct, you can come and apply to us for the green infrastructure retrofits. But when it comes for us, hiring and designing, we have to be careful. It is a lot of funding required to retrofit those sites. So that's why we are only limiting those partnerships in the CSO areas. Currently, we have 145 sites in the CSOs. There's a couple outside of that. Roy Wilkins in Southeastern Queens. We just started construction because we thought it will help the community for flood mitigation benefits if we bring some of that runoff from the streets and collect it in the parks. We are looking those unique strategic opportunities outside of CSO areas where we don't only do stormwater management, but we also can help with flood mitigation. But it is limited outside of the CSO.
I thank you for the clarification, but I will be harrying these park people because they don't talk about you guys at all. And I also heard from the same person in parks that permeable street anything doesn't exist. So you gave me an example. They're going to get it.
You're welcome to join me. It's on Alderton Street in Rigo Park. It's where we have built the porous pavement, and we have 3 other pilots. One in Brooklyn, one in Queens. Please feel free to come in. These have been, not the way we are doing the rain gardens is in thousands. So this is just, as I said, it's our next generation of the green infrastructure. If we do get the approval for Jamaica Bay particularly, but it is another tool in the toolbox. And yes, they are indeed working. We just need to get education done more properly to the public so they don't change their oils on top of a porous pavement. Those are some of the things that we constantly.
There's a lot of church highways going through South Brooklyn. In 10 years, there will be no cars in the church highways. You're welcome to flood them, and you can pay attention.
I appreciate if you can support us dealing with state DOT on that one. I'll take your offer.
Is there anybody else who hasn't asked a question yet before we hear from folks who have? Okay, gentlemen.
First of all, it would be nice if there had been more copies of the LTCP. Some of us were not able to get a copy, and it seems you've run out.
Okay.
And there have obviously, a lot of the issues that have been coming up have been about the water quality and how that's put in the report is you folks prepared the report. The other thing is, though, lack of action, or that we would like better water quality, and that's not in your control because you can only deal with the funding that you have. It's kind of frustrating as somebody who's been paying taxes here since the 80s, before I even moved here, that one project, like the Hudson Yards, 56 billion, none of that going toward this. And then the fact that the city gave them 5.6 billion in corporate welfare instead of getting taxes from them in corporate welfare. That alone could have made a big dent in the project that we're talking about. But as far as the quality issue, I understand why people would be frustrated to compare it to what's happening in other places versus New York. I'm originally from Connecticut. When I was a kid, there were still factories. The river near where I lived back in the 60s, it changed color based on what the local factories were doing that particular day. Now in New York, yes, there's been improvement. I'm a member of the Bronx River Alliance, and I see raptors that weren't around before that feed on the fish, the red-tailed hawk, bald eagles. That's great, but we still aren't at the point where people have been mentioning, as compared to, forget the sound, the freshwater bodies where I was growing up. A lot of them you just could not swim in. Forget being able to consume fish that you catch there. Growing up in the 60s. And then, as it's been mentioned, the law that's pushing this came around in 72, like it's gone on 50 years. I was surprised this past fall. I had to go back to Connecticut to see my family, and one of my cousins was telling me that numerous towns on the Connecticut shore of Long Island Sound, the water quality is improved in those portions of the Sound, that they're actually, not only has the soft-shell clams and oysters come back, but they actually are giving permits out for people to harvest clams and oysters, and they're suitable for consumption. Where does that end? As you get closer to New York. So it's happened in other parts of the Sound, but it's not happening in our part of the Sound.
Yeah, you had a lot of really great comments. For the first one, if there's anybody that is still here that didn't get a copy of the summary, come up and see me. I think we have enough copies here on the podium, and happy to give you one. Also want to flag that it's now up on our website, as is tonight's presentation. There was some additional content that we were not able to get through, but if you have time to go and visit our website, all of that will be there. And then for your other comments, I think you really hit the nail on the head in terms of what our challenge is that on the one hand, as Angela pointed out, we have had great successes, and we always joke that Pam Alardo's team is the team that's responsible for the whales coming back and for sort of all of the environmental and biohabitat improvements that are happening in our local water bodies. But as she said, we're not there yet. There's still work to do. I think that, $9.5 billion for this program is going to, take us even further. And it represents a lot of really hard thinking, a lot of analysis, a lot of interagency and interbureau coordination. What you're seeing here tonight reflects the hard work of dozens, if not hundreds, of people. But we hear the frustration, and we definitely appreciate and understand the fact that we're not all the way there yet. We're working off of a legacy system. But, you know, we're going to continue to build off the good legacy that we've inherited, because we have inherited an amazing drinking water system, as the gentleman in the back so eloquently said. And so we're going to continue to invest and to prioritize projects.
Before you negative,
okay.
But if the New York City drinking water quality is going to be brought up, then please remember to also point out that that water comes nowhere near our part of the state, and that it's the closest source is Valhalla, and most of it's coming from the Delaware water tap.
Yes. Any other questions before we close out? Okay. So I would just like to say, and I know a lot of people have had to go, but I really do just want to say a thank you to all of you that came out tonight. A very special thank you to those of you who have been with us since our first kickoff meeting back in 2012. There are some people still in the room right now tonight who have been with us since that first kickoff meeting at the Newtown Creek. It was called a wastewater treatment plant back then, Pam. That's how long ago it was. And so we really appreciate how far along we've walked on this path together. As I said earlier, we know that we didn't always get it right, particularly from the public outreach perspective, but we really have worked to improve. And we really appreciate all of the time, all of the comments, all of the energy that you've put into it, because as Angela said, we really see all of you as partners with us on this, because we are so passionate about New York City and passionate about all of our stakeholders, not just those in the room, right? Like anybody who's in New York City that drinks tap water or uses the bathroom is a stakeholder of ours. And so it's really important for us to continue to advocate on their behalf and advocate on your behalf and advocate on behalf of the New York City environment. So thank you for working with us on that. Send us your comments by March 2nd, because as Linda said, our LTCP is due in March. So we do want to hear your comments. We do want to respond back to them. So please let us know if you have any additional questions. And with that, good night and get home safely. We are here exactly half an hour.
Thank you very much.